Hi there, everyone. We're about to go live, and thank you for coming by on a Friday night and joining us. So we're going to be talking to Captain K, Randy Cramer, and he is here. Actually, you can see his face, I believe, and I'm looking. I have two computers going, and I check out one to make sure that we're actually live. So this is going to be all about the Earth Defense Force. This is Friday night, October 3rd, and this is Project Camelot live stream. It will be broadcast, it will be uploaded to YouTube at least during the night tonight, and should appear there tomorrow, depending on how long we go for and the upload times, etc. So be aware of that. And we do have 94,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel at this point, so, and rising, and that is something of an achievement. So yeah, so this will go out to them, and so regardless of how many live listeners we have, these are going to be the very dedicated listeners, and thank you for that, for hanging in there. And you can ask your questions tonight, and that should be a lot of fun. We do know that Captain K, Randy Cramer, has been out there on the circuit. He has originally come forward with exopolitics.org, Michael Sala, and I'm going to, let me double check with you. How long ago? I'm saying it's like 5 months. Was it longer than that?
I want to say that Michael Sala and I did the original interview that I did for him back in April or something like that.
Right.
And then it may have gone up, a month later or something like that. And then we had a little bit of a delay using the pseudonym, the Captain K pseudonym, and then going to using my real name, just because I had some personal preparation in my life to sort of deal with before I was ready to do that. And then once I felt I had sort of personally prepared adequately, then we went ahead and did that. Interestingly enough, the second that we did that, and he went back to the original audio-video files that we recorded, all the audio portions had been deleted. So someone had decided it would be fun to get on his computer and tamper with the audio files and delete them. So we kind of lost our original 5.5-hour full audio-video interview, the first one that I did. We still have it on audio with the no video portion, and we have a video portion with no audio, but we have no audio video portion. So it was more just an annoying monkey wrench thing than anything else.
Okay.
And the more I keep talking around, the more I just keep repeating myself anyway, which is fine. So, I wasn't too bummed about it, and anything else I was, expected a little harassment. So, but that is what happened. But that was about April that we did the interview.
Okay, great. And so what I'm going to do here is see if I can read this this intro that you've given me. And just for the people that are listening, like I say, this is the live broadcast on live stream, and live stream is such that we leave it up there, and they will be immediately after this is over, it starts running, and it just runs nonstop as long as you want to view it. And that's how live stream works. So so people that tune in later will be able to hear the beginning even later tonight, right after we get off the air. So it's kind of a good arrangement. We are not able to pay for the live stream channel. It's a quite exorbitant pricing over there, and so there may be commercial interruption during the broadcast at the viewer end. I'm not sure how that works, but I can say that it doesn't record onto the actual video, and therefore it won't be going onto YouTube with commercials. So don't worry about it. You will be able to hear everything that is said. Now, this is something that I've been doing lately. I'm asking the listeners, and Randy, you're welcome to do this as well, to make a recording so that we back each other up with this, because these kinds of dialogues are really important to the world at this point, and we don't want to lose anything. And so if one of us gets attacked, hopefully someone else has a copy. So please do record and make a copy if you're able to, if you have that kind of technology at hand. I am using more than one device to record this at this moment. Hopefully my extra recording devices will actually work. And so if if you can help out at the background, just as a safeguard, because we want to keep this going here,
Oh, certainly.
And so appreciate that. Now I'm gonna turn on this recorder here in the background while I speak. So now I'm doubling up here a bit. Okay, so at this moment, let me say that I think we got this all going. Okay, Captain Randy Cramer is a U.S. Marine and super soldier who served for 17 years on Mars, defending the Mars colonies. He got his start in Project Moonshadow and was assigned to the Mars Defense Force from a covert military branch, United States Marine Corps, special section set up by President Eisenhower as a unit designed to handle all matters of ET contact and hopefully keep things in check regards to the activity of MJ-12 and some of their more unscrupulous members. Hurrah to that. He was given permission to speak publicly by his superiors in August of 2000. I think
It was 2014.
2014, and is a sanctioned officer providing covert information to the public because secrecy has become its own threat. And that's a wise statement there, I have to say. Thank you for that. So
You're very welcome. Thank you for letting me make it.
okay, so obviously, I don't want to duplicate everything you've ever done out there, because that would just not be so fascinating for the listeners. And I can say that recording is available still on exopolitics.org. It's on YouTube, and it's on YouTube. Also, other people have compiled the 5-hour interview in their own means and methods and put it on other channels as well, as will happen with Camelot interviews all the time. So, so it is
I
out
put up
there.
links to every interview that I can on my website for people to also, get the different bits of information from the different questions and so forth as the interviews, go in different directions if they want to get the bigger and bigger story. I certainly get emails from people who've gone listen to them all and have their, have comments and thanks for it. So if people are really that interested, I try and put everything on my website for them to take a peek at and listen to it all right there and have the links there too.
Okay, very good. Well, at this moment, we're just going to sort of launch into this, and we'll definitely leave at least a half hour, if not more than a half hour, for questions at the end.
Oh,
and
great.
So
I love questions.
As long as we can go, we'll try to do this for 1 to 2 hours. I try not to go much longer than that, just out of fairness to my guest. We tend not to have breaks, but we can have a break if you need a break and you want a break. So just make a mention to me. Now, what has happened, I don't know, what you know about Camelot and all of that, but basically we have been on this sector and dealing with this secret space program now for about 8.5 years. And so we're kind of not new kids on the block. And so my questions are going to be jumping ahead a bit here and there, and hopefully for people that do watch this later on and haven't seen the other preparatory interviews, if you can give, I've just given a very short introduction, but if you can give your own introduction and see if you can summarize your experience as close as you feel, and take whatever time you need to set the scene, so to speak, and from there we'll launch and go into other areas. So I think it'd still be good to give some background here.
Sure, Carrie, I'd be happy to. People who are already familiar with me know my background a bit, but I will just be succinct and lay it out there. And so anybody who's hearing this for the first time who is not familiar with me may go, what? But I'm just going to lay it out, and we can get to the questions and we'll get to the various parts on why I have more than one good reason to say that I'm telling the truth and to be able to verify that I'm telling the truth, as well as to be able to answer and provide a lot of questions and answers. So, simply put, really, as a member of United States Marine Corps Special Section, I have to sort of give that a mention first, which was an organization that was started in kind of late 1953 when President Eisenhower signed a secret executive order into action, mandating their creation, signing the United States Marine Corps Special Section Special Code into law. It was designed to be a military branch unto itself, so that it would be able to deal specifically with ET issues, because the notion that all these other branches and intelligence groups were going to be parceling out or doing things, Eisenhower could see where some of the people in that wanted to go with that, and he really wanted to try and create an organization that had ethical oaths to a system of constitutional order that he felt might keep it more in line with the legal authority, seeing what the dangers were for all of this turning illegal. I mean, his farewell speech trying to warn everybody against the military-industrial complex was, because he saw that coming. And in late 1953, he tried to do what he could to catch that coming, which was to sign United States Marine Corps Special Section into law. And I could go into a little bit more about that, but we'll just say that they started to deal with the problem like everyone else was dealing with the problem back in the 50s. And as the progress made itself into the 60s, everyone was really competing internally for technology and information, and it was way less of a cohesive internal space program, kind of all one system or all under one agency or something. There were many agencies that were supposed to have authority overarching and keeping it all under control, but that was never the case. There were always the problem of these middle managers from the special study groups who had their own projects on the side and their own agendas and were interested in padding their own pockets and making sure that they could pocket their own technology to prepare for their own contingency plans and so forth. So it really became a kind of a techno-feudalist state. I really like to say that the Cold War was really not a Cold War intelligence war between the East and the West, or Western and Eastern ideals. It was really between every single military intelligence organization that had to do with anything extraterrestrial, exopolitical, and it was really a techno-feudalist, techno-civil global war between everyone trying to get that information, because it was absolutely, without question, the most important information that could be held at that time. So people want to say historically, it was about, nukes and codes, and no, it was always a priority to be dealing with extraterrestrial and exopolitical information. And certainly when I say, everyone against everyone, I mean that the Army was spying on the CIA spying on the Navy spying on the Marine Corps is spying on the FBI is trying to spy on everybody else. I mean, it was really has been a pretty chaotic order. So when we talk about sort of the overarching organizations like the Earth Defense Forces, this organized effort, you have to understand that it's loosely organized. It becomes an organized sort of entity, but what creates and sort of fuels that entity is less organized and less stable than the entity itself. And so it's really important for me to emphasize there is no one group, one person, one family, one organization, one military intelligence outfit controlling the whole shebang, one alien agenda controlling the whole shebang. Not even close. We have dozens of agendas, dozens of organizations, dozens of relationships and treaties with different ET races and groups that all have a stake and an agenda, and we should do it this way, or let's cooperate with these people, but let's fight with those people. And really, if we want to talk about that grand theory, I call it the grand cluster fudge theory for a reason, because there's really no simple way of trying to organize the exopolitics of state when you're thinking about the whole planet, every secret military intelligence organization that's involved, how that creates a covert space program to try and cohesively defend and protect ourselves and funnel that information and technology into something that seems to be a manageable product, which in and of itself does do something, but its power is certainly limited, and because of paperwork and so forth, when you separate the EDF from like the Mars Colony Corporation and the MDF, again, who have this relationship, but on paper, they're very separate. So the EDF doesn't really have direct authority over the MCC or the MDF. But if there was a situation where they had to, then it would have to be at the point of plasma cannons. It would not necessarily be a straightforward, we want to do this, you want to do that. So it's very complicated and it's very mixed up. So without diverging too much, which I did a little bit there, in the 1960s pretty much became the priority technology was super soldier program technology. We were really developing the genetic alteration technology and the ability to really, from the ground up, build super soldiers. Because before that, what we really had was nothing but trauma-based mind control super soldier technology, which is really primitive, really damaging to the subject, and causes the subject to have a really short lifespan. So if you want to guarantee that you have a subject that can get a job done for you, at the hand of a very, very large stick, it'll happen, but you're not going to get it for very long, and it's going to burn itself out or self-destruct or become completely mentally unstable or something. So the United States Marine Corps Special Section, being the organization that it was or is, and being beholden to the O's and the special code that it is, it really was doing plenty of tests and assessments about this technology and was assessing that much of this trauma-based mind control was not working well. And so they essentially did a study that said, hey, everybody, we've done a study, and we think that your methodology of trying to create super soldiers is bad. And we have a better methodology that we'd like to try and we'd like to suggest. And we think you all should consider why this is a better way of doing things than what you're doing, because we think what we call going with the grain training versus this against the grain training that you're doing will not only create a better subject, super soldier subject, but they'll last longer, they won't go crazy if it works right, and they'll actually want to do their job because you won't beat them and rape them every day. And which, kind of seems like pretty simple to some people, but to certain people in the organization, just that absolute domination was really important, and they were not interested in listening to someone's alternative. So United States Marine Corps Special Section decided to implement its own program, and thus created something called Project Moonshadow. So in the late 1960s, Project Moonshadow was formed, and by late 1969, my DNA was being concocted in a petri dish somewhere, and then when I was born in the middle of 1970, I was genetically engineered from the ground up at that point to be a super soldier fighting machine. And was implanted back into my mother's womb and came out 9 months later and raised as normally as my parents could figure that everything was happening. They had no knowledge or suspicion that anything weird was happening. They had a pretty strong religious background, so any of the sort of more weird metaphysical things that were occurring, they could certainly just sort of write off as being a demonic attack on the household, or something that was much more spiritually answerable to their religious system, as opposed to being something maybe more material and extraterrestrial technological. But they were certainly there when strange bruises and strange burns and things were appearing. In the middle of the night, I would wake up and be, what is this? Where did this come from? So they're getting old, and they don't remember a lot of that stuff when we talk about it. But, there's certainly conversations that we've had. They certainly recall strange things were going on. But they kind of live in their own universe as well in some way. So they weren't really sure what was happening. I recently briefed them, and they actually took it very well. I have to say, they actually took it very well. And they're actually being very supportive, and they're doing, I think, as well as can be expected for their age and their background. But I think, to their credit, they live in a world where a lot has happened. So, all of a sudden to say, oh, hey, guess what? Secret space program, super soldier program is not the craziest thing they've ever heard. And it's not the most outlandish thing they've ever heard, because we're kind of getting to that day and age where we're hearing more and more enough that this is more the normal than it is the abnormal that we've been led to believe for 7 decades. So basically, I was trained from my adolescence up to my teenage years, to the age of 17, as a super soldier in Project Moonshadow, which again was a different kind of program. The goal was not to just beat us hard and make us become murder machines, but to try and train us to be actual thinking, feeling, moral super soldiers that would make moral and ethical decisions that would be for the good of the people and for the good of the planet around them, which our command kind of based on this historical notion, they really took the classic Greco-Roman heroic model and said, look, if we really want to create people like, this, if we want to make an Achilles, if we want to make a Hercules, if we want to make an Atlas or an Ajax, they're not just murder machines. These are moral, ethical heroes who did what they did because they believed in a better purpose. They believed in a better thing. And they were not just bigger, stronger, faster, smarter monsters. They were bigger, stronger, faster, smarter, stronger, better heroes because they believed in self-sacrifice. They believed in not just kicking back and being fat with a bunch of cows and a bunch of wives, but they were out, fighting the dragons and the monsters of the world to protect the people. So the notion that you could create something that was smarter, better, stronger, faster, and more moral and ethical was their goal. So they took 300 of us and ran us through the program. And then when I guess sort of graduated at about age 17, and then we're Project Moonshadow essentially as only one of many super soldier programs, not just in America, but around the world that contribute to the larger program, then parcel soldiers out of those programs to something called Project Mannequin. Project Mannequin is a larger global program which takes all of these super soldier programs from everybody else and then assigns them either back to military programs on the ground where super soldiers are either trained or used, or then onward to the outer programs to the EDF, which anything that is off-world, off-planet is definitely EDF territory. And so you either kind of get parceled back into a terrestrial unit or you get sent off-world. And then once you get sent parceled to the EDF block, the EDF then parcels out its soldiers to Radiant Guardian and to the other solar stations and any of the other planetary bases that they have. I'm not privy to every planetary moon base that they have, but they parceled them to all of those, and some to Mars. And like Mars, the Mars Colony Corporation is what runs the Mars colonies, and they contract the MDF, which is its own private military contracting agency. So nobody in the MDF is not from the EDF, but again, like I said, the EDF, because of this whole paperwork thing, is no longer, in charge of everybody at the MCC or the MDF. So there's all this separation, and I can't tell you what other corporations involve other bases or other colony projects exactly, because I'm not privy to all of that information. But I can only presume, really, I think it's only reasonable to presume that the Mars colony is not the only off-world colony that we have on another planet. I would think that's really safe to assume. How advanced and how far along they are, whether they got started 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, another, whenever, is a whole other question. But I think it would be ridiculous at this stage to think that the only place we are is Earth, Moon, and Mars. I think there's absolutely evidence to suggest that we're all over the solar system and beyond already.
Okay, but you shipped out from Earth at the age of 17, is that right?
Correct. That is correct. So on November the 17th, 1987, or actually in the morning of, so it would have been November the 18th, 1987 at 2:30 a.m., as pretty par for the course for an evening of training, a localized wormhole appears, two guys come out and they're like, okay, it's time to go, and I'm, okay, let's go. But we didn't just go do a training session. It was off to an underground base to a hangar with an Aurora TRB-3, big black triangular vehicle that I think they're actually manufactured by Boeing, actually, and that they're sold out to the Air Force and whoever else uses them. And they're still kind of a standard terrestrial shuttle vehicle. They're not the most advanced thing at all, but they do the job, and you don't necessarily want to give way more advanced technology to people if they catch one or get one or take one apart or something. So we were taken there, and then from that vehicle, that ship, were taken off world to the moon, to Luna Operations Command on the dark side of the moon, where we then went through a processing process and were sat down in front of a junior officer, an EDF officer, and explained, here's the contract, you're going away for a 20-year tour, we don't know where you're going to go yet, I can't tell you that, we don't know, it's in this packet, it's classified, but you got initial here, sign here, this is what's going to happen, then we'll bring you back, and we'll, erase your memories for security reasons, plus you don't remember all that crazy stuff anyway, and then we'll send you back, and you'll have a really cool job, and that's a lie, but, they give you this kind of song and dance just like recruiters do. And then after your initial sign, there's another medical exam, I think, and then there's a waiting period. And then we got on this much larger vehicle, which the scale is so large. It's always hard for me, even when I have a really clear memory of it, to really like scale the height and the width. But I think it had to be at least 600, 700, 800 feet wide, and 4, 5, 6 stories more tall, like 6, 7 story building maybe, with windowed cockpit up maybe where about the 5th floor would be, about 2/3 or so of the way up or something like that. It had kind of a roundish shape, but then it kind of had like this tapered wings. But it's not an aeronautical vehicle, so I'm not sure exactly what the purpose of the wings, except maybe extra fuselage for whatever you want to stick inside your vehicle there. And then the back kind of came to a teardrop point, and the front was, like I said, kind of rounded and shiny. The whole thing was sort of chromed, reflective, shiny surface, which I will point out in case anybody else has never pointed this out. In space is great stealth technology, because when you are reflecting and you look like black starry space, you're harder to see than if you're a white, glowing vehicle, or if you're a black vehicle. You're actually harder to see if you're that shiny, reflective sort of surface than you are if you're any other kind of surface or shape, turns out. So we got on that thing, and it had multiple floors, levels. That must have been at least 2,500, 3,500 personnel that they could transport on that thing. And we launched out of this huge hangar underneath the surface of the moon on the backside. And then the pilot took us around so we could take a little bit of a close-up view of Earth, so we get this one last look. And then the whole ceiling sort of became this view screen, like a giant window that you're looking out, laying back in this lounge. It's pretty awesome experience, and I mean in the actual sense of this huge giant window that you're looking right out into space at Earth, and it's pretty close-up way. I mean, enough that you can see clouds and the electrical storms and the movement of what's happening, and you could see that it's this very alive thing, and
so you're saying there are clouds and electrical storms on the moon?
Oh no, I'm talking about on Earth, when we came back for our last look at Earth, and we're close enough to see the atmosphere and see the electrical storms. And
I see.
Earth is a living thing. Yeah,
okay.
It was a pretty stunning visual.
Okay, so there was kind of like a jump there, because I guess so you jumped to going back from Earth to the moon, and you said you were based on the moon and you did some training there.
No. I was not really based on the moon
temporarily.
So much as,
I mean, you said you went to the dark side of the moon.
Correct. Okay, so yeah, on when I was 17 years old, when I was basically being sent out, the first thing we did was arrive at Lunar Operations Command via Aurora TRB-3, and then we got on this much larger transport craft, which again I don't know what class or what it would be called. It was this multi-story, 800 feet wide, reflective, shiny, chromed out thing.
And from there, you went back to Earth.
Well, the pilot took off from the backside of the moon and then took us in closer to Earth to get one last look, which from the moon would kind of appear a little far away. He wanted to get a nice close look, so we had this huge image of the Earth right in front of us and our full sort of scope of our view. So I mean, he took us in back into like less than 200,000 miles or something, like 200,000 feet or something. Really close.
And you traveled this, and how much time was passing during this time?
I mean, it was a matter of minutes, it seemed like. I mean, maybe it was a 15, 20-minute, ride from the moon back to the sort of looking at Earth, and then once we left Earth, it was maybe a 15, 20-minute ride to Mars, because then we went via wormhole. So then the vehicle, however the wormholes are manifested, went through one, and then we came out at Mars, and then he says, oh, welcome to Mars, we've arrived at our location, then brought us down to the ground and landed at Ares Primus.
Okay. And then this was your base for, if I recall, is that 17 years, or is that, because I know you had 3 years, what appeared to be some kind of, I think it might have been Solar Warden. Correct me if I'm wrong. We call it Solar Warden. I'm not sure what you call it.
It was Radiant Guardian when I was a part of that program, but it's changed, a number of times, and it's been that something similar to that,
In essence,
more
became a pilot though for
right.
three years, right?
About you, whatever was the remainder of my 20-year tour, however that works out exactly. It was 17 years, 3 months, 14 days ish, 14, 15 days, depending on how you want to count, I guess. So, and then the pilot training school, interestingly enough, that was supposedly sort of out of the normal. That was another quantum dilation. It kind of, in order to get more time out of us, they were like, we're not going to waste time on your tour with your pilot training, so we're going to take you to this lunar base to do your pilot training, and then you're going to bring you back, 15 minutes after you leave, so you don't lose any actual service time. So I was like, okay, great, that's fine. You get an
Okay,
extra.
so there's time travel in essence involved in when you move from one place to another, right?
If they want there to be, yeah. I mean, if they want to say, if they want to save time, they can do something out of time so that instead of it taking days, weeks, or months, it takes 5 minutes or 15 minutes. There are some interesting ways to play with time like that. I'm not a really good at temporal mechanics. I don't think I'm good at explaining it, but the time guys really understand their business and certainly know how to move things around without crashing the whole temporal matrix of the universe.
Okay,
Which is
so
more stable than apparently we all think too, as far as we think about it. You could end all time, or no, you can't really just end all time with a temporal accident. You can cause localized temporal phenomenon, rips and tears, and things like that. But the temporal fabric of the universe is actually really strong and really stable.
okay. But in essence, you were based then on Mars, and you were
Correct.
there. Explain to people that are going to be relatively new to the subject what your job was on Mars.
Right. Well, essentially, I was assigned to the Mars Defense Force, like I said at that point, from the Earth Defense Force, which was a private military company that is contracted to the Mars Colony Corporation, or the MCC, to defend the Mars colonies. So we essentially were one of many stations who create a buffer zone around the territory which the colonies are located, so as to try and keep any of the local, both hostile animal life and possibly hostile sentient life, out of that territory. And I can only sort of answer for, what was taking place in our area, which, for some time I sort of presumed was the whole thing happening all over. But the more information I get from other people, the more I realize, oh, no, I was just at the sort of the northern Arctic front. So, it's sort of this very specific area with some very specific things that were going on there that were not necessarily what were happening everywhere else. But there's certainly still interesting crossovers and interesting validations when talking to other people. And eventually there will be a lot more people talking about this. I know a bunch of them, and they're not ready to come forward right now. But, I'm talking to these people on a regular basis, and I know people who are talking to people on a regular basis who, are all talking about their Mars experiences and their Mars service. And we're all collecting data on that and correlating the data and cross-referencing things and people. And so, yeah, it's not just me. I mean, I'm maybe the one talking right now, but there's a whole bunch of people right behind me who were all chatting about it and talking about it and trying to come to a better understanding of what we know about what happened and not just our individual place in it, but how that creates a bigger picture for us to understand and enable us to present and present that bigger picture to people too. So a lot of them feel really compelled when they hear me talk to say, "Oh, I know something you should know," and be able to help tell people. And so I'm really appreciative that they feel like when they hear that I'm talking about it, that they can at least say something to me, and I can relay that if I can check on it and correlate that information and pass it on so that I can have a bigger picture. So, but essentially for 17 years, 3 months, 14 days, I spin up forward station Zebra, which is pretty far north towards the sort of, maybe kind of northern Canada. So we used to get some pretty cold weather up there, and it would occasionally snow, which is a pretty surreal experience. Martian snow falls slower because the gravitational coefficient is less. So if you think watching snow here is this kind of cool, quiet experience because the way it falls all nice and fluffy and slow, on Mars it's really amazing because it's coming down in slow motion, and it's this very, very, very quiet, slow, surreal experience. If nothing else is going on to distract you from it anyway. The first time that I was there and it snowed, it was this very, very strange experience, very surreal. we were always kind of like,
Okay,
what?
so you're
This,
talking
this
about
snow right
being
now?
you're talking about being on surface of Mars. Are you talking about the Mars that we see and we think we know in this dimension? Or are you talking about a fourth dimensional Mars?
Oh no, I'm absolutely talking about the physical planet of Mars that we know and understand to be right now, in which our rover and probe is on right now. No, we're absolutely talking about the same place. So some important things to note about it. It's not exactly the way NASA tells us. NASA tells us that it doesn't have a breathable oxygen atmosphere. That's not true. It does. Now, it's not super breathable in the sense that this is more like thin mountain air for us. So it's really not recommended outside the equatorial regions to try and like survive without an environment suit. The equatorial regions can be a bit warmer and a bit more mild and temperate, so it's not the worst thing in the world apparently to just be sort of exposed in street clothing, so to speak. But you get any of the directions farther north or south, and you're going to get way more extreme temperatures and winds and so forth, and you're going to need some protection. But again, it is, and you're going to need some oxygen assistance and some breathing assistance if you're going to do any physical moving or fighting. That's for sure. So we never went outside without an environment suit, without a powered environment suit that was body armor and everything else that we needed all in one package.
Oh,
Um,
okay. But did you have structures that you occupied on the surface, or was it all underground?
we were inside of a mountain, and pretty much everything, as I understand, is underground. I mean, there may be some facilities which operate on the surface or do things on the surface, but really 99% of everything that you want to stay functioning has got to be underground. It is still susceptible to some pretty intense windstorms. Still 100, 150 mile an hour, 200 mile an hour windstorm could really ruin your day, no matter what you are above ground.
What about meteor showers? Is there a problem with that?
You're kind of close to the asteroid belt there, so there are a good number, of meteor showers, but I wouldn't say that a lot of them touch down. Like here, there's an atmosphere, and most of them just burn up. So, it's not uncommon, to see in a night sky to see lots of shooting stars, but I don't recall ever seeing like a meteorite or an asteroid hit when I was there.
Okay, and
And there's active defense systems against that as well. I should point out that Mars also has active defense systems against that sort of thing. So,
well, what about a shield? In other words, sort of a shield. Actually, I don't know if you'd acknowledge this, but from what I understand, we have a shield here over some portions of the Earth, even at this time. It may be made of a certain. Even I don't understand necessarily the technology they're using, but it first of all will tell them if there's any incoming craft and light it up sort of like a candle. But at the same time, it also is apparently some kind of a shield that resists penetration. Did you detect anything like that on Mars?
I don't know anything about that level of technology specifically. I can say that I do know that a number of field experiments are being done on our planet, Mars, other planetary bodies that we occupy. Excuse me, where you may want to do any kind of field development to have any kind of just cloaking devices and other kind of shield protecting devices, sensors, anything that's going to let you know when someone's coming in, things that are going to protect you, or things that are going to keep you hidden. Pretty much. And the moon certainly has a cloaking device around it. Mars certainly has a cloaking device around it. We certainly have a cloaking device around us to keep things, at a certain distance away from being able to see or detect us. And it's supposed to mute, all those radio waves that are bouncing out from the planet, would let everybody know where we are. We're supposed to be muting, that, so we're not sending out signals to the entire galaxy on where you are. Oh, guess surprise what? Why when we're listening for radio signals, why we don't hear them from everybody is because, everybody else who's smart is also muffling their signals so that they're not on the map to everybody in the world. That just turns out to be a technology, like, shh, be quiet. And so we go out there listening thinking that everyone's being loud and noisy when everyone's being stealthy and quiet because they don't want us listening in on their conversations and knowing what they're doing and where they are. That's just kind of more standard practice than it turns out to be now.
Right. Okay. So when you were deployed on Mars, you were in essence, based on your story, which I've listened extensively to, basically encountering, from what I understand, reptilian species and basically what sound like what Mark Richards, Captain Mark Richards of the Secret Space Program, who I've interviewed, would say are called trogs.
Oh,
That's what
okay.
his experience is with them. You called them, I think, insectoids, or
Insectoids, yeah. There was certainly an insect-based species that had the ability to engineer, other hive insects, as sort of to do their way of building machines is genetically engineering another bug or another, insect that will do that job. And so they have this very organic way of doing this. Very incredibly advanced organic science. It's really, really advanced organic science. I'll just call it that.
so your battle though was to, in a sense, there seemed like there was small battles, skirmishes that you were defending the base that we have, just like here in, if United States and Russia get into an issue, maybe over in Afghanistan, they're having a skirmish there. So you were fighting over territory. Is that correct?
Constantly. And I think it's important to note and point out because I keep hearing people presume what that conflict was about or what we were fighting over. And so I'm feeling more and more that I need to be really clear about why we were fighting and what we were fighting for. It was not for supremacy of the planet. It was not for a total global war of the planet until the Draconians attacked and got involved, which I haven't gotten into be able to talk tons about, like, this lengthy war and what the stages were. But, we were having what I would call polite, civilized conflict, really, with the native reptoids and the native insectoids. And that's really, a hard thing to say when you're still like, killing and stabbing and blowing each other up. But it was way more polite and civilized until the Draconians came along and really kind of messed up what was an organic system of territorial boundary keeping that was not meant to overrun somebody else's hive or territory, but simply to maintain that everyone had a certain weakness to them and no one could grow over strong so that everyone could maintain a peaceable territory without anyone actually trying to become too powerful. So the whole point of having conflict for these folk was to engage in a way in which kept any one person from becoming too powerful and then overwhelming the other. So it was a constant back and forth that was meant to maintain and stabilize the territory and the peace arrangement. Believe it or not, I know may sound very strange to some people as a way of doing things, but we inserted ourselves into that system that was already happening between these other two species and engaged ourselves in the same way and started having the same sort of territorial localized conflicts with them, which essentially, is now I understand, really was for the MDF's a private corporation. They're a military contracting corporation. They got to test that equipment. They got to see if that equipment works. They loved a scenario that was nonstop, war where they could just keep testing equipment in a perpetual situation where they didn't have to worry about someone dropping bombs on them the size, of Texas in order to completely wipe them off the planet or any other type of genocidal attack, because that wasn't, on the strategy map for these people. So you could really engage in this whole other kind of regular combat and warfare and keep testing your equipment and testing your technology and perfecting it in a way that made really a lot of sense to me for a military corporation, who'd want to do that. So
Okay.
that was essentially what we were doing. And we engaged with them on a very regular basis until the Draconians attacked, and then that war raged, and then there was peace agreements, and now supposedly we're not fighting anymore. But since I haven't been back there, I couldn't tell you that for sure.
Okay, but I want to slow you down here because
please,
there's
yeah.
obviously areas to delve into, and so we don't get too far ahead of ourselves. What I wanted to ask you, first of all, in terms of territory, are we talking about having Mars be divided up territorial so that there are what you may say is demilitarized zones in between territories where sort of all bets are off, or there's no fighting going on, sort of a no-fly zone sort of thing? Or is it boundary to boundary, the way we are here on Earth, where, Russia is right up against, a country like Ukraine that may or may not be friendly? In other words, since there's only three, you at least are indicating only three major powers on Mars. Not sure if that's completely accurate, but I'll go with it for the moment, and then wanted to drill down a little further, and we can do that in a minute. But bottom line is, my question is, how are those territories set up, and are they clearly demarcated?
That's a very good question, and I can only sort of answer that question because we're very specifically isolated in the territory up north that we were isolated in, and we were not really allowed to visit the colonies. I've never been to them. I've never seen them. I don't even know what they exactly look like.
When you say the colonies, what colonies of who?
The
Human or
Mars
non?
Colony Corporation colonies, which apparently they have 5 colonies. The Mars Colony Corporation is a consortium of, Earth-based banking, money people, technological corporations, states, governments, and so forth, who are all participating in order to be part of the Mars Colony Corporation and to be part of the colonies and to be part of that genome project and the sort of future of whole civilization project, as they like to think of themselves and call themselves, in order to preserve humanity, et cetera, et cetera. So,
so you were not, in essence, you were guarding the colonies, but you were not based in the colonies?
Correct. I have never seen the colonies, never even been close enough to them to tell you whether they're domed, underground, or what they look like at all.
I mean, is that even possible if you're fighting against? I mean, was there, because my understanding, and I know there was this huge battle at the end that actually, impacted you. It appears in a very deep way, and then you actually got reassigned to the moon. But prior to that, you're saying you weren't in the colonies, you didn't go there. Is it possible that that's an area of your brain, with all due respect, that's been erased? That memory.
It could be repressed memories that I haven't extracted, but I find that unlikely at this point since I feel that I've done a pretty solid extraction of pretty much everything, like all the chunks that would be a chunk here, a chunk there, a chunk there, and so that would be a missing chunk that I'm. It's unlikely that I haven't found that. I can tell you that Forward Station Zebra was the most forward north station. And so we had other military stations behind us, and that was the back line. Front line was north, was in front of us. So
but
the colonies were way behind us, is what I'm saying. They were way behind us. So, and we were the most forward operating station. So, and I pretty much never left that station other than to go fight something and then come back for 17
Okay, but when you went to go fight something, as you call it, you'd had to go further north? You didn't go south?
No, because all of our other military bases were backing us behind us, and whatever happened behind us, they were dealing with unless they needed our help, and we would get called to something that was immediately behind us. But there were several layers of military stations behind us between us, what was sort of the front wildlands in front of us, and the colonies way behind us. So you have many layers of military bases between us and the colonies, and we were the most forward operating station. So yeah, I mean,
okay. So are we talking? I mean, I'm trying to look at the layout of the moon. Are we talking about the human civilization, for lack of a better terminology, Mars base, whatever you want to call that? You're saying in essence they were south, you were north. The planet is round, so at some point, you're talking about if you advance far enough, you're going to end up finding this human civilization. So we have to assume that there are. I mean, you must have had some kind of maps of where where your adversaries were, what areas they occupied, where you could go, where you couldn't go, what you would be called, what they would consider an invasion by you.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. No. We had a sector map of everything that we were responsible for, and so that was territory that was familiar to us and marked to us. But if it was outside of our grid, then that was really not our area. It was somebody else's responsibility. It's very, very, very compartmentalized. Very, very, very compartmentalized.
Okay. Would the someone else be trained exactly like you and have the same capabilities?
It's possible. Sure. Yeah.
But you don't know that for a fact.
I mean, no, I don't know exactly what was made into me to be unique or what was made to me to be like other people in Project Moonshadow or other super soldiers exactly. So all I can say is I was made like me, and 299 other people were made in a similar fashion. But beyond that, I don't really know.
So based in this zebra base part was how many super soldiers?
It would have been, let's see, we had a division of 256 and a sister division of another 256. So yeah, just over 500 of us.
Okay.
In one mountain and forward station Zebra.
Okay, and just to jump ahead to that sort of, and please, understand that, I'm just trying to get the lay of the land here from what the
Certainly.
other interviews I've heard you do, and I'm not trying to question your honesty. What I'm
No
trying to
problem.
do is get a picture in my mind so that I can steer my questions, using that picture in mind, and also for the sake of the listeners, because I did notice in all the interviews I've heard you do that I'm a little unusual in the sense that I'm more of a person that wants to drill down, that wants to clarify and get things clear, and then move on to the next thing. So I just wanted to say that I don't want to upset you.
Oh
Okay.
no, no, no! I really appreciate that. I often find that people are moving awful quick, and we have to move through really quick given the time frame that we're dealing with, and they're trying to get a lot of story all at once. And I often feel rushed when people are asking me 2 and 3 and 4 part questions, and by the time I've gotten halfway through the question, I'm like, "What was the other part of the question you were asking me?" So no, no, I totally appreciate you getting as detail oriented as you want. Don't even worry about it. Just keep asking the questions until you feel like you've clarified and understand, and I'll keep answering them to the best of my ability.
Okay, because I remember that you related this very dramatic, I mean, really should be a movie. Maybe it will be. I assume but it's certainly being offered that you're going to get, even as a result of you going to be filmed by Hangar One. But at any rate, what happens here is you have this very dramatic ending, sort of crescendo battle, it was where you were sent in to get something to trespass on a the other's land base. And I can't remember whether it was the insectoids or the reptilians. I'm assuming it was the reptilians.
It's the reptoids, correct?
Yeah. And you were told to get something there, and that just became a debacle. But basically, if I recall, the numbers that were killed there were in close to 1,000. So what
Correct.
you've
It
said,
was our division,
500.
our sister division, and 2 other divisions that were from Forward Station Echo that were all joined us.
Okay, and
So
forward station Echo, would that be behind you still, or would it
it
be
would
in
it
front of
would
you?
it would have been behind us and to the right, and so for whatever reason that they could be spared to bring forward for this particular mission, that was why they were brought forward to all the way up front. So they were
Okay.
a bit back and to the right from us.
And when you realized you were fighting side by side with them, was this the first time that you found yourselves encountering uh, other soldiers from Forward Station Echo? Had you fought with them side by side in other skirmishes in the past or not?
The no, we had seen them a couple of times before. I mean, at least a couple of times before. There were certainly skirmishes over that 17-year period, and where many divisions from many of the stations had to be called, and there were massive, massive, massive conflicts in which thousands of soldiers were involved. In some cases, even when we were using the clones for infantry, tens of thousands of soldiers that were being used and employed. There were some in the peak of that conflict. There were some huge, 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 massive conflicts in which most of the entire force was called to one location. So we'd seen them a few times. So
Okay,
it
and
wasn't like we knew them every day. But yeah, it wasn't the
but
first
in
time.
terms of the capabilities as fighters alongside you, were their capabilities the same, completely different, or and in terms of their equipment and their the way they dressed, et cetera, were they different? Were they larger? Were they equipped completely differently in some cases? Are you able and at liberty to describe the differences?
Sure, and no, there weren't any. Across the MDF, there was standard issue body armor, standard issue weapon, and all the super soldiers seemed to be about the same height and size. As far as no one was really over 6'4", 6'5". I mean, that was kind of about the biggest dude you get. But we had people that were 5'5" too, but you could pack a lot of punch in 5'5", believe it or not, sometimes. So there were super soldiers don't necessarily have to be tall.
Right.
But we had sort of that sort of, I would say, a wing between sort of 5'5" and 6'5".
So like
And
football players.
yeah, yeah, sure.
Well, how tall are you?
6 foot even,
Okay.
out in the middle there.
All right, and what about the notion? And I am jumping around a bit because I am
Yeah.
going to be using this to be sort of a bouncing off point for people again, to have listened to the other interviews, to come here and start seeing a sort of a different, maybe a bit more dynamic discussion with that allows for accepting the basics that you've already said and then moving on from there, as I mentioned. So when
That's great. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Okay, so what I wanted to know is my understanding, we've got whistleblowers out there such as Clark McClelland, who talked about 9-foot tall Anunnaki, in essence, suited up, that were dealing on a space station with our astronauts, and that he was watching this on closed circuit TV during the Apollo, some of the Apollo, things that they were trying to do. I hesitate to call them Apollo landings because I think there's some misconceptions there, but in essence, and so that
the Apollo missions, they were the Apollo missions, yeah.
Okay, and so you
some of them were landings for sure. Some of them were landings.
Fair enough, and we could talk about that in a minute as well if we can get a chance to go back there. But at the moment, just for the sake of argument, did you have commanders that were in essence Nordics, Anunnaki, or any very tall beings, humanoid or otherwise, that were instructing you on Mars?
No, not on Mars at all. And when I was in the EDF and I was a pilot, I would have to say I couldn't answer that question because the command sections of the Nautilus were not open to the pilots. So I don't know who was all on the command on the bridge. And so we may have had ETs, scientists or technicians or soldiers helping us on the bridge that I would have never seen. If that was considered something that needed to be compartmentalized. I mean, the pilot, section and the air wing section was in the middle of the ship, and the command section was in the front, and the engineering was in the back. And engineers didn't come up into the piloting section, and pilots didn't go back to the engineering section, and pilots didn't go up to the command section, and the command section would come back, wherever they needed to, whenever they needed to. But it was interesting. And again, that compartmentalization was really, really very, very thick and solid. You were just not allowed past the doors into engineering or past the doors.
Okay, so that's to do with basically the Solar Warden, and I forget the designation that you called it.
Project Radiant Guardian. But
Radiant Guardian. Okay, fair enough. But to get back to Mars and the people that were commanding you, in essence, or even the people that happened to be inhabiting the bases that were supposed to be occupied by humanoids of some kind, your understanding is that they were traditional humans as you understand them to be?
Every single person in my chain of command or in the MDF that I ever dealt with was a terrestrial human to the best of my knowledge, or appeared to be one. Sometimes there was a period of time in about the first 3 months that I was there when we were getting a weird allotment of super soldiers and different clone soldier programs, and some kind of a weird hodgepodge that our CO kind of, put the hammer down after about 3 months of just getting crappy numbers, and said, look, I'm tired of you sending me all this refuse up to the front line. You either got to send me consistent, what I want, or we're just not going to do this anyway. And things really changed from that point out. But so I can say kind of in that first 3 months, there were a few of the super soldiers that were sent to us that looked really odd. Like they were definitely mixed with some very weird ET DNA and had very strange sort of social behaviors that made me think that they were not completely human, but they weren't necessarily ETs. I can definitely tell you that they were, things that were being genetically engineered or made in the super soldier programs and then being sent to us. That I know that for sure. But
okay,
they definitely had some mix of some weird DNA in them for sure.
Okay, but I'm actually a little bit more interested at this moment in the command structure,
right,
and the ones that you experienced.
Yeah, and in the MDF, everybody in the command structure was terrestrial human that I ever had contact with, that I ever saw. That doesn't mean that there weren't anybody outside of our base or location that was doing that was otherwise. But my experience was never ever, as a soldier in the MDF on the ground, did I ever experience anybody in my chain of command or anybody in the MDF or part of the MCC who did not appear to be a terrestrial human.
Okay, and that's interesting to me because there is some conflict there with some other testimony I've gotten in the past. I'm wondering if,
Oh, again, like this is very specific to the location where I was at because I really wasn't anywhere else. So anything that was happening back in the intelligence offices, back at the MCC, could be totally different, and I would not know anything about that.
well, you became an officer though, right?
At the end, after when I got my promotion, at the end of my career at the MDF, yes, I got to go to flight school and was made an officer at that point. But I was just a sergeant major at that point. Still,
Okay,
I finished
before.
my career at the MDF as a sergeant major.
Okay, and when you were a sergeant major, were you did you go to meetings where you would see a lot of other officers, for example?
Um, No, when I was a sergeant major, I mean, there were more meetings that I got to go in the command staff meetings and so forth. But no, we it was still just all terrestrial humans that I recognized or experienced people to be who were from back home on Earth somewhere. People often talked about, where they were from back home or such and such, or oh, back in Iowa, it was like this, or So you definitely got a feel for that. Everyone was from back home.
Okay,
And again, that may have been just very specific to what they wanted, that allotment of personnel to be at that location. So hard to say,
right.
but that was my experience.
But you were based in this particular location, am I right? For is it 17 years in one place?
Correct. Yeah, Forward Station Zebra was my home for 17 years, 3 months, 14 days.
Okay, and when you were walking around the halls, was it such that you did not see a lot of different, say, officers and different, levels of men going back and forth, and in other words, again, because even if I ask a person like, say, here on Earth, have you, did you experience you work for, let's say, Lockheed Martin, and did you see any particularly tall individuals walking by from time to time? The person might have to respond if they actually did see, because in our culture, right, we have a sort of a 7 foot tall person would be pretty tall
Right.
by our standards,
Correct. Yeah, for sure.
and certainly one would comment and maybe even remember that. If you saw somebody higher than, a taller than 7 foot, you certainly would notice that. So basically, you're saying you didn't see anyone like that. Is that correct?
When I was stationed at Forward Station Zebra for that time, that is correct. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, anyone out of the ordinary while I was stationed there.
And but there were times, it now, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I would listen to, to the interviews, and you were saying that on a certain level you did start sort of delving in and researching a bit into what was going on. Is that right? You started seeing files or things?
I took opportunities that presented themselves to me to look at the EBE manuals when I was in medical on the Nautilus because it was a manual. It was a 3-ring binder that was usually close by. And if, somebody had me sitting there for a while, I could reach over and start flipping through the manual. And then when one of the technicians or the doctors would come back and go, hey, you're not supposed to look at that. And I go, oh, sorry, put it back. But, anytime I could sit there and flip through it, I would try because it was an incredibly fascinating subject to me. But information was really hard to get. What I can say is that when I was on the Nautilus and part of Project Radiant Guardian, I was one of the only officers on the entire ship that had infantry training and had hand-to-hand training. So when officers from the Nautilus were, and sometimes were diplomatic personnel coming from Earth or coming from elsewhere in the EDF system, were coming to the Nautilus, and they would go on these diplomatic missions to the intergalactic space station around Jupiter, I would get to go. And so I did get to spend a number of visits there in the large round room, which is essentially this just huge round room that's got to be like 100, more than 100 meters, wide or something like that. With these giant windows looking out to Jupiter on one side and space on the other. That's a sort of a diplomatic free meeting place for a lot of different folks and species who come and are hanging out in the area. A lot of our personnel who are meeting different people there for different reasons, and so nothing ever went wrong or went squirrely, but they always wanted to have someone with hand-to-hand and infantry experience in case something went weird in a weird diplomatic situation or negotiation. But everyone was always really respectful of the rules of intergalactic, no fighting zone and so
Okay,
forth.
so in that setting, because in that setting, did you come across, I mean, you must have come across varying species beyond what you had encountered on
Oh
Mars and Moon.
yeah. Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, a number. Sometimes it would be like mind-bendingly, like I'm looking at too many different extraterrestrials in one room, and my brain really could just not absorb, 10 different species all at once. And sometimes I would have to like stare down at the table for a minute because I was getting a headache, literally getting like a physical headache, or would have to stare at one species and try and like absorb all the pieces that I could. But for some reason, really, I mean, if there was just too many different species in one room, and I'm trying to assess, 8 different heads and craniums and body types and arms and joints and so forth, it just really played this crazy trick on my brain, and it would just hurt my freaking head, and I couldn't do it. So, but it
Okay.
was very interesting, and I'll have to say that even with a pretty good photographic memory, and I try and think about some of those images my brain was trying to take. Some of it was just so much information that was so different than anything that I'd ever seen or was used to before, that a lot of my brain in some ways was just going, what? What? I mean, it was just really doing a double take. But I think it's just a natural organic process for your brain to do that. I don't think it says anything really for or against me as a person, just having a moment of my brain having to check itself and, going, oh, too much data, too much input. We cannot compute all of this at once.
Yeah, no, that
Um,
makes perfect sense. But to get back to Mars
Please.
and to your battles on Mars, before we kind of go that far ahead, um, but thank you very much for going over there. If you were a fighting person and you that was your main task on the zebra station, then you're going out and you're pretty much not going south. You're going north and possibly not east or west, or maybe east and
Well, I
west.
mean, the grid that we cover, is kind of a squared shape, but it's got some odd grids, outside of that square. It's kind of an odd, squarish map with some grids outside of the sort of the main square of grids. And that was what we were responsible for. And anything that was happening in that territory that we had to respond to, we were responsible for. And all of the bases that belonged to the reptoids or the insectoids that existed within that area were ours to be responsible to either watch out for and or assault if it was time to go on a raid.
Okay, but in terms of attacks from those bases to you or to your base,
Mm-hmm.
um, in other words, that was kind of your motion, and so in a sense you weren't. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but in a sense you weren't really protecting the human bases if you were so far away as you seem to have described. You seem to have been on the outer perimeter, right? The last line of resistance. Is that correct?
The front line, correct? Yeah, the
Okay.
northernmost front line, correct.
All right. So when there were skirmishes, what were they caused by? Were they caused by their infractions, and can you describe one in particular? Or was it our infractions or the humans going out and starting a raid, as you call it?
Any and all of the above depend on the day. Some days it was very quiet, and some days you would get a surprise visit, and other days, they would come marching off from a long way away, and you wouldn't see them coming. And other times it would be a large enough number of them that we couldn't send out forces to meet them at once, and we'd have to wait for them to come and attack us, and then have this whole scenario where we're prepared to sort of be invaded and have the base overrun. But it's just basically designed to be overrun. I haven't got into a lot of explanation about that just because it's actually just pretty gory and pretty horrendous to try and explain what happens once they get inside the base. It's really just turned. It's just a mess. It's the base is designed to protect itself and have us be able to protect it as well. And it's designed to be overrun and to act as a giant trap, essentially. So I won't get into a lot of
Okay,
real description of it. It was a very ugly process.
the reptoids, were they? How tall were they in average?
Oh, they averaged, anywhere from 6.5 to sort of 7.5, 8 feet tall, broad shouldered. Because the gravitational coefficient is different on Mars, I couldn't tell you how much they weighed, but if they were on Earth, I'd say they weighed anywhere from 450 to 500 pounds apiece. They're big. They're
Okay,
really big.
and are they cross between humanoid reptilian? Are they standing on their hind legs? And is their body shape a humanoid shape, being reptoid at the same time, or are they literally looking reptilian with a tail and the whole 9 yards?
It's interesting. They certainly evolved from a pure, reptile species, whether, some type of similar dinosaur type species or something that evolved over time so that it's bipedal, two-handed locomotion. Yeah, some of them definitely had tails, and some of them definitely had tails that were a bit longer than the other, but I wouldn't say that any of them had a tail that was over, a meter and a half or something like that. They were more used certainly for balance, but they could turn and hit you with it pretty hard too. It was not a dead appendage of any kind, a useless appendage, but they weren't necessarily long, flippy tails like maybe they used to have or something. So they definitely evolved out of that. Their faces, I would say maybe they had been longer or snoutier at one point, but they had certainly shortened up a bit. They had pretty sharp teeth.
But what about a humanoid reptilian species? Did you encounter those?
I would not say that these appeared to be a blend of a reptoid species and a mammalian species, and I don't think I ever encountered a reptoid mammalian species cross.
Okay, so you would say that the reptoids prior to the Dracos arriving were one species of reptoid?
Correct. That was our experience. Correct.
Okay. And then as far as the insectoid beings, they look like a combination, at least I think you say, of a praying mantis and an ant. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, they were, sort of 5.5 feet tall, and, six appendages, sort of two top, two bottom, and two in the middle that could sort of function as arms or legs. So they could kind of stand up on two and, sort of have four arms or, sort of scurry on four legs and use two arms if they wanted to. They were, and they essentially had the ability, again, the very organic science, the ability to engineer all these other insects that, they used to mostly to do a lot of the fighting for them. They didn't do tons of the fighting themselves. Most of the fighting, they had other insects that they engineered to do for them. So most of what we fought weren't the intelligent sort of insectoid species, but more of, the things they built for us to fight with. But we did certainly get, when we did stop having sort of fighting with them and were able to have some conversation with them, they're very intelligent and very reasonable and insects, which means they have kind of a dispassionate view of life, but a very practical view of life. They don't lie about anything, not to themselves or
Okay, and
anybody else.
how are they talking to you telepathically?
Oh yeah, they're very psionic, very psionically developed, and so my first conversation with them was psionic conversation.
Okay, do they bleed?
Oh yeah, they sure do. Oh yeah, they bleed. They come apart like anything else. You can burn them, squish them, poison them like any other bug.
And is that true of the reptoids?
Well, they bleed too. Yeah, they have two hearts, so it's a lot harder to kill one of them. They have a double circulatory system, kind of a internal organ circulatory system.
Well, how do you kill a reptoid on if you're just standard? Do you have to shoot both of the hearts? Do you shoot them in the head? I mean,
you don't necessarily have to shoot both hearts, but you do have to cause either a blood pressure loss in both systems, or you have to damage the spine in order to interrupt central nervous system, or hit them in the head or take them out in the brain. So, I mean, you have to either go with a total central nervous system disconnect, or you have to take out the blood pressure in both heart systems and both circulatory systems.
Okay, and what was the tools that you were using to actually do that?
Our primary weapon as infantrymen was a magnetically propelled rifle, like a railgun or a Gauss rifle. But we had grenades and we had rockets. We had some other, sort of light weaponry. We had guys with flamethrowers. But mostly it was a magnetically propelled rifle and hand grenades, infrared hand grenades that target infrared targets and go after them.
Okay. And is that the extent of your equipment?
No, I mean it wasn't the extent of it. Again, it was a 17-year process of, starting at one point and going to another in which equipment would sometimes change and, protocols would sometimes change and they would try and issue a new piece of equipment and then sometimes have to recall that piece of equipment or change that piece of equipment. The rifle, certainly when we started, it was like a 9 millimeter, no, 11 millimeter projectile. And by the time I finished as a sergeant major, I mean, we were up to a 22 millimeter projectile. So it changed over time. The helmet changed like 4 different times. The body armor, the sort of recovery system changed 4 times, which is sort of if you fall over, it has its own sort of recovery system, which sort of bounces you back up with sort of these air thrusters that sort of lift you back up in the
Okay,
air.
are you familiar with Halo?
Like the video game?
Yeah.
I know of it. I don't play it because
Have you
it's
ever
not my
read the
thing.
books, the Halo
No,
books? Okay,
no,
well, the
never read the
Halo
book.
books
Never
and actually seem to be a preparation for young people that might want to become super soldiers.
I've heard people
And
say that, and I'll, from what I know about it, I'll agree with that. Yeah.
okay, and I have read some of it, and I found that they had they're actually suits were augmented with an artificial intelligence. Did you have a component like that?
Um, I mean, the system interfaced, with you cerebrally, and so you had a heads-up display, in your helmet, and that was sort of mental interactive. So you did have an interesting mental interface with the system that you were working with, but we didn't have an artificial intelligence. We didn't have anything that was artificial intelligence when I was in the MDF. Nothing at all.
Okay,
And
and how long
we didn't
ago?
have anything artificial intelligence when I was in the EDF on the Nautilus either. So not that we had access to it. My understanding from command at USMCSS, there's a reason for that, and that's because artificial intelligence itself is very dangerous. It's very untrustworthy, and it tends to become self-determining and power-seeking. So anytime you want it to do something, you have to really limit its ability to access any power systems or weapon systems or anything like that at all, or it will, and you'll be sorry.
Okay, when did you leave? Actually, let's get that set. What year did you return to Earth?
Uh, Technically, I finished my tour in 2007, but then was returned 15 minutes after I left on the morning of November the 18th, 1987, at 2:45 or 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was.
Okay, so technically you were here, at least in this 3D reality, in 1987.
Oh, absolutely. And then, like I said, no, and then did the mission for 20 years, and then they told us to age reversing thing, which I don't think was really anything more than putting my consciousness into a younger clone body, which was just more efficient. So I wake up and think I'm still 17 with repressed memories.
Oh, okay. So the body you're occupying now is a clone?
Probably from the original one, yeah, but the original one, I mean, it had been blown apart 20 billion times and has been rebuilt, a bunch of times too. So that there's my original body wasn't my original for a long, long time because all the parts had been replaced at least one point or another.
Oh, okay. But if that's true for you, then how is it that when they lost the 1,000 troops, if they were able to clone them, take their consciousness and move them into clones, why did they lose them at all? If you have gotten several versions of yourself.
That's a very good question, and it's because the medical technology is limited. So when someone is damaged, you basically have to get their body or a chunk of their brain, essentially enough of electrical activity in their brain still functioning to be able to get what we call a retrieval. And if you can retrieve them, then that means that there's enough of a little bit of their cord connected from their consciousness to their soul that you can retrieve and bring back to their body as you start to restore and heal the body. But if you lose that connection, then they're unretrievable. So if they're dead for too long, if brain activity ceases for too long, or is just not able to be registered altogether, then someone is unretrievable and they're dead. So I was very fortunate to make my career and not ever be actually dead. Not everybody was lucky enough to, make it. Some people would, be reconstructed several dozen times before, they were unretrievable that 39th or 57th time and died.
Okay,
So
but in,
that the reason is that day that most of those people were killed and destroyed in such a way that they could not be recovered or retrieved or brought back. And there were maybe 30 some bodies that they were able to retrieve from that incident out of 1,000. So of those 30 some people that they were even able to retrieve, I don't know how many of those people lived, but they weren't able to physically retrieve the bodies or the brains of, the other 1,000 people that died that day.
okay, now when there were skirmishes between you and these two races, were they also skirmishing against each other?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they certainly were having skirmishes with each other as well that had nothing to do with us, and then would sometimes have skirmishes with us on either side. And then on rare occasions, you might have two groups of mating in the middle, and the third one decides they want to come join the party, and then you've got a real interesting three-way cluster fudge.
Okay, is it? Have you stayed? I mean, I know you sort of are out here talking now at the sort of under orders even by your commanding officer.
It was a request. I was not ordered to. It was a request. I was asked if I wanted to do this. I was asked if I wanted to go public and asked if I wanted to do it, and I agreed. So you could say it's under orders, but it wasn't really, you got to do this. It was really, I was asked if I wanted to, and I said yes. So it was a request, and we have a good relationship in that way. I don't really get told to do anything. We have a nice relationship of, we think this might be a good idea. We think this might be a good idea. Maybe you should think about that. So we're really more interested in success and goal of the program, and not so much about me having to follow orders or have this sort of regular chain of command thing happening at the moment, since it's not any kind of traditional situation that we're dealing with. That's what the brigadier tells me anyway.
Okay, now you've called him a brigadier, and have you named him by name? I've seen some names. So I don't know if they're specifically that person.
He goes by the name of Brigadier General Julian Smythe. I can tell you that there's a name that's on his driver's license when he goes home at night, and there's a name on his driver's license when he goes to work every day, and they're not necessarily the same thing. So when I say that his name is Brigadier General Julian Smythe, that's how I know him, and that's how we know him at USMCSS. But that doesn't mean that that's the name on his cable bill that comes to his house.
Okay. Okay, fair enough. Are you familiar with the Orion fleet that's built by humans?
No, that's a new one on me.
Okay. Since you left in theoretical terms, well, it sounded like 2007 in reality, but in 1987 is when you think you were separated in real time back here on Earth and brought back here. That would be a pretty big gap in time. So do you think that you have remained up to speed on what the status is on the moon and Mars, and with these various, in other words, do you know, for example, that the reptilians have been completely subdued, or the insectoids have been subdued, or neither one of them, or the skirmishes are still ongoing? Do you know that kind of information? Do you have ongoing intel, or are you completely detached at this time such that you don't get any updates?
Well, I can certainly tell you that the last time that I was on the moon was in 2007. I remember the closing ceremonies that they had for the returning EDF officers, and I can tell you what it looked like then, but, that was a good, 7 years ago. So since then, I don't know what they've changed about Luna Operations Command. Certainly can't tell you what, has happened on Mars since a few years before that. Since the last time I was there. Now, I do get regular intelligence reports, weekly intelligence briefs from the brigadier. We have conversations on a very regular basis. So I feel like what I know, I have to trust that my people are telling me the truth on. And there are certain things, sure, I can use my own abilities, and I can remote view things, and I can, test things psionically if I need to, use whatever abilities I have to double, triple check. But I still... I'm also a military officer. When I can grab it with my hand, then it's very, very real to me. And if I can't pick it up with my hand and I can't stab it, then it has a certain amount of less solidity to me. So I presume that I'm being told the truth at the moment, because I have no reason to doubt that. I have every reason to believe that my chain of command and my superiors want to help this process and want this process to be successful, and have provided a lot of information to me that has been honest and truthful and helpful, and to other folks as well. A lot of the information that they are providing me on a regular basis with is people who are contacting me and talking to me about their own sort of super soldier military abductee problems. And Chain of Command has been real helpful at helping me to get to understand where some of these people's programs are, who their chain of command are, if they need to deal with that. In some cases, people need to understand if they do have super soldier issues or MyLab issues. You can start to try and, cooperate or work with your chain of command if they're conducive to that, because there are a lot of organizations right now that are kind of trying to use their super soldiers to activate them, to use them for different purposes. And I would say a lot of those purposes are more positive than negative. You'd really be maybe not, but maybe surprised on where the internal machinations of the internal civil war are going right now. And I just really want to point out, as far as I know and I understand, we're winning. So I'm not having a sad face at all about how the Illuminati or the New World Order is going to take over, because I don't see that happening at all. I see quite a resistance happening, and I see, a lot of loyalty shifting as, those in the middle start to see that there actually is, like some strength on the resistance side, that they're starting to shift their loyalties. And also because they're realizing they're screwed. They've got no future. They've been told, yeah, you're good. Hook up with us, and we'll take care of you. And they're being sold out like everybody else, and they're on the chopping block like everybody else. So they're starting to see that it's in their best interest to change their loyalties. So I think we're seeing some huge shifts there.
Okay.
But I can't answer every question as far as what's going on there, and I certainly can't talk publicly about everything I know about what's going on there. But I will just emphasize that I think we're winning, and they've been helping me help other people sort stuff out. And so I want anybody who's having issues to understand there is a very real possibility that you can get some of your, problems sorted out with your implants and your programming and other stuff that we really haven't been able to access before. And I'm still hoping, as I know Andrew Bastaggio is hoping, that we're going to be able to get some class action, legal action happening, and get some help for people and get some support and some action taken as well. And this may be down the road, but we can hope that as things start to shift and change, that attitudes will shift and change, and Congress will shift and change, and the executive will shift and change, and judges will shift and change. And we'll start to actually see some things moving in that better direction as the apparatus of machinations of states start to move in a positive direction.
Okay, you talked about the reptilians and the insectoid beings skirmishing. You talked about your skirmishes with them, in essence, out and out battles. It appears at times. Mm-hmm. And my question to you is, what are you guys fighting over?
Again, nothing more than the stabilization of territory. So essentially, we walked into an environment where the casual conflict, as I like to refer to it, that started out, that we were engaging in before the Draconians got involved, was about maintaining peaceful territorial guidelines while having sort of regular, skirmishes with your opponent that kept them from becoming too strong. It was designed to sort of, in a way, if you can think of it like, if everyone is in a circle trying to defend their territory, but the way they defend their territory is to every once in a while run over to someone on their side of the circle and kick them in the ankle really, really hard. So they have to spend, a certain amount of time down on one leg, unable to attack anybody else in the circle because you just kicked them in the ankle. And then you run back home, but you don't want to hit them in the head and end it, because then that would destabilize the power in the circle. That's kind of what was going on. It was really about, all right, I'm going to kick you in the shin and then I'm going to run home, but I'm not going to stomp you out because that would upset the balance of the circle.
Okay, so but
it was what they were already engaged in, and we inserted ourselves in that kind of.
But are those races, the reptilians and the insectoids, are they spacefaring? Are they taking off on spaceships and leaving Mars and going and doing exploration, coming to Earth, interacting here, et cetera, or are they indigenous and not able to leave?
Well, the indigenous Martians certainly have the ability to space travel and to be spacefaring. Most of them aren't using it at the moment after the atmosphere sort of exploded and the planet was sort of sent into dishevel. There was a huge sort of rollback from their very spacefaring advanced technological civilization, just things that were a bit more primitive, but it doesn't mean that they've lost that ability or that knowledge. I think it means that the few that have that knowledge or information anymore, the ones that really, had that information and knowledge after the planet was mostly destroyed and whoever was left underground, they left. And those who stayed were basically like, we screwed up and we need to try and fix the planet that we've screwed up. And I've been trying to sort of stay close to home since. So they're not really interested in, they're very capable of going elsewhere. They're not interested in going anywhere other than fixing and healing their planet. They are not done fixing and healing their planet. So they're not interested in going out and fixing or getting in anyone else's business until they fix their home, which is, another 1,000 years away or something before they really terraform the planet back to what it would be.
Okay, well, what about the beings that created the face on Mars? It doesn't sound like either of these groups were responsible for that face on Mars. Is it your understanding that they were, or would you say, were you told the history, and have you seen the face on Mars up close?
No, I've never seen it up close, but my understanding is that would have been made by a humanoid species that occupies space on Mars, or used to occupy space on Mars. I never encountered them, but I've heard other people say that they're still there. So my understanding is that the face was a construction that they made. It was made by humanoids that occupy Martian space.
Okay, and so your group was not stationed anywhere near the face on Mars, I take it.
No, we were much farther north.
Okay. And in terms of dialoguing with, if you did from time to time fight with other groups, at that point there would be also opportunity to gain more intel, for example, about where they were based, about what things they saw and understood about their assignments. Did that kind of dialogue take place?
Um, I mean, certainly, every time you're engaging them, you try and get as much information from the encounter as you can, and those reports are all pretty much sent back up the chain of command by the platoon officers and uh, the division officers who send all that information up the chain of command. Our job as fighting men and women is mostly to just, fight, defend, and do your job on the ground. So there wasn't much past that we did, but I'm sure that there and know plenty of other information that was going back and forth as far as what the officers were gathering and sending back and forth. But we weren't doing any real conversing with the ETs much at that point. So it was mostly just lots of, screaming and fighting.
Okay, but you weren't conversing with the ETs, but by the same token, it sounds like you weren't also conversing much with troops that came from other bases, human troops.
No, not much. I mean, there wasn't much opportunity to. So most of the time when you're meeting in one location, it's because you're getting ready for a fight, and then you don't have much time to muster up, get in line, and you're still with your group. You're with your squad and your division, and people are next to you, and people can start getting mixed up and crossed over. But as far as pieces on the chessboard, the officers are trying to keep groups organized and in different positions where they need to be. And sometimes when it's over, if it went well, there's lots of chest bumps and high fives and so forth with everybody. But then it's you're getting called back to your bulldog transports and go back to the base where you were at anyway. So not a lot of not a lot of downtime conversations, card playing, or anything like that with anybody outside our own division.
Okay, but in humans will be humans, and for example, in my talks with Mark Richards, he's in prison right now, but they've got a quite an incredible sort of communication chain, you might say, that goes on between the men.
Certainly.
And by the same token, you're in the same base for years on end. There's got to be a thirst for knowledge, even a natural curiosity, to learn more and to explore. Do you think that those sort of natural inclinations were programmed out of you temporarily, so to speak? Or do you think that you lacked curiosity? Or do you think that you're a person that follows orders, and prefers to, I don't know, what do you do for freedom of mind, so to speak? How would you occupy your mind if you weren't being curious about, what was really going on there?
Oh, certainly. No, I think that compartmentalization is really the answer to that question. So when we were on the battlefield, we really were just not having more than seconds, if anything, of time, next to someone who was not in your own squad or your own division. So there really was just not the ability, time, or space to have conversations with those soldiers out on the battlefield. Just no opportunity, period. Back at our base, now we did have staff at the base who was not soldier staff. We had sort of the cooking and kitchen staff that was independently contractors of some kind who rotated in and out and would change about every 3 weeks. I'm not sure exactly where they were all coming from, but they would rotate in and out about every 3 weeks. And the supply staff was another staff that was not part of the soldiering regular MDF group, and were contractors that would, cycle in about every 3 or 4 weeks. And the command staff were absolutely, members of the military unit, but they certainly occupied their part of the base in the command section, and rarely ever came to the barracks section, and we were almost never allowed in those sections. Now, the crossovers happen, like I said, when you're in the chow line and you're talking to sometimes the contractors working in the kitchen, but they're not only, got people watching them over the shoulder, and, they're fairly tight-knit, but you can have some, chit-chat conversations sometimes with them, but it's limited. It's just very limited. So, and they know what they're not allowed to talk about, or what they're not supposed to share information with us. And certainly the penalties are heavy, for violating those guidelines. So whatever the punishment on their end might be severe enough to make them seriously not want to step outside that boundary.
Okay, but again, to get back to this idea of programming, because actually I find it hard to believe that soldiers that are working together, fighting together every day, day in and day out, that there isn't some subtext, that there isn't some subliminal conversation going on, possibly even telepathic. Is it possible that you don't want to tell me this, or that you don't remember it, or that it, in other words, we're talking about what in theory are humans, right? And there's always a subtext when you've got humans, in my experience. So what I have to understand, or trying to understand, is what really went on between you soldiers being based for such a long time. I understand you did have a romantic experience there. You met your wife there. You got married. Am I right?
Correct. That is correct.
And so there had to be a subtext going on to even allow that to occur, right?
Oh, sure. So, well, I mean, if you're asking what was life, like in the horseshoe, and we call it the horseshoe because it's shaped like a horseshoe, what life in the horseshoe was like when we weren't fighting or training, I can tell you that between eating, sleeping, training, fighting time, and a certain amount of recreation time in the simulators, there was not a lot of time left. But what little time that we did have to sit around and chat or talk or socialize, certainly we spent plenty of time talking and chatting and socializing about where we were and what we were doing, and trying to understand our collective experience a bit, and having our own collective understanding of what was happening. And you start to develop your own names for things and nicknames for things, and because we don't have zoologists talking to us about what the wildlife looks like, so we have to come up with names that we call them, and we have to come up ways of describing things that we see. And if you're out on a patrol and you see something interesting or different, sure, you're going to come back and you go, oh, guess what we saw on patrol? It snowed today. And then we saw birds, flying out of the ground, to lick up the snow to get the water, because it's so dry. And so all the birds came out and were on the ground, like licking up snow. And so there was a flock of birds. And when you ever see a flock of birds, the only time I've ever seen a flock of birds is when it snows. But not every time it snows. You got to have enough ground birds and wherever the area you're standing, that when it snows, that they're going to come out and start licking up the snow and drinking it. So
okay, Richard Allen. Are you familiar with Richard Allen Miller?
No, that name's not familiar.
Okay, I just interviewed him last night again. He's a physicist who worked in the secret space program. He was basically working with special forces and getting them to learn, to become more psi, sort of expand their psi abilities.
Sure, basic psionic training, sure.
And so that's kind of his area of expertise. In other words, in a sense, consciousness. Mm-hmm. Even though he's a physicist, so he's an interesting combination of a character. And
not much difference, really, to tell you the truth, between consciousness and physics. They're way more alike than they are unalike.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll take that for the moment. But my question is actually, what he has said is that there's more water on Mars than there ever has been on Earth. So you're characterizing Mars as a dry planet and with occasional snow, and that being a sort of an unusual circumstance. Do you think that there's a conflict there? I mean, it might be interesting for you guys to talk because his perception as a physicist is that there is that Mars actually has it's a smaller planet and it has more water per I don't know square mile than Earth.
Sure. No, I would actually believe that. Most of it is concentrated in polar ice caps, and I've definitely seen streams and small tributaries and so forth like that. I know I have seen pictures of larger bodies of water and so forth. So I know there's plenty of water around, and if you want to figure a calculation like that to say that there's more water on Earth, on Mars than there is on Earth by doing that math, I could see that math, but I'll go with that without having to double check if he's a smart physicist. I'll take his word on that. All I can say is that standing in the air, it was more often like being in Colorado than it was like being in Oregon. You know what I'm saying? So it was more like being in a dry, thin-aired state than it was like being in a humid tropical environment. So I would just say that most of that water is not in the air where I was at or in other places. I'd say that that water is either in the ice or in other water systems. And I think there's a huge amount underground, too. I think there's a lot of water just under the surface, and there's a lot of underground rivers and so forth. We certainly I think we certainly had a tapping system that went down into the ground and tapped, a natural water source. We got all our water from some kind of a well or a tapping system. I know that. We didn't import our water. We were able to tap down into the ground and get water right out of the ground.
Okay,
for 1,000 people and more.
Are you familiar with the photographs of the tunnels on Mars?
I think if I know what you're talking about, I think I have seen the photographs of the tunnels on Mars, yes.
Okay, and did you experience these in real time?
No, I've never seen them.
Okay, interesting.
I've never seen them there. But again, we had an area that was certain sectors north that was away from a lot of other areas and a lot of other things. And even when I've gone back and looked at the pictures from which the ESA, the European Space Agency pictures, I thought were a lot better than some of the NASA pictures we got back from the last orbiter. And so when looking at those, I was trying to get a better lay of the land and a better lay of some things. And I would just say that my understanding, as I'm doing more research now, of where a lot of the older ancient civilizations on Mars were, they were again not that in that farther north area where we were at. Where we were at was kind of really was an outline area and sort of environmentally more hostile and less friendly than some of the other areas. But where it was far-reaching enough, I think it was a nice place for the insects and the reptoids who lived up there because it was very safe, sort of that far up north. It was really just them and us and not much else. So, and my understanding is that the southern tribes, sort of the reptoid tribes and what's going on sort of in the equatorial and southern regions is a way more interesting in the sense of more like the Serengeti and a lot more action and a lot more creatures running around and big lizards and things like that than what we were experiencing. So in some ways it was, we're up north in a much quieter area for a reason, but it wasn't quiet as far as the three of us were concerned, but as far as everything else is concerned, it was sort of a quieter area.
Okay.
That answers that question.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, there was a discrepancy also because you described the sky on Mars as being sort of, if I recall, slightly reddish. Is that correct?
I've described the sky as being a number of different things. I've said that it can be bluish, it can be reddish, it can be purplish, and it can be blackish. I have experienced the Martian sky to be a number of different things. On a regular daytime, regular season, blue sky is pretty normal. But there's a weird sort of period at sunset when the sky when everything can get really, really purple for about 15 minutes, and it's a very weird kind of experience. But there's a lot of iron oxide and a lot of dust, and so after a lot of dust can get kicked up, and after a storm or something, you can maybe think you're going out into clear air, but you've still got this kind of reddish sky that I think is probably from most of the iron oxide. But Andrew says that there's some accountability there for the shifting light and so forth in the northern region, which as a physicist makes a little bit of sense to me too. But without knowing more about the actual density of the atmosphere and what the refraction, ratings and so forth of light coming in at different angles. I couldn't lay out the physics for why it is any of the things that I've ever seen or experienced. All I can say is I've experienced to be about as many different things as I would have thought that it ever could have been, from blue to red to purple to black.
Okay, so are you calling Andrew Bishago a physicist, or are you calling yourself a physicist, or are you just
I'm
talking
just saying. I'm just saying
in
I have
general?
studied the laws of physics, but I'm not going to necessarily say that I'm a doctor of the law of physics or anything like that. But um, Andrew seemed to know a bit more about what he was talking about when he was suggesting that something about light refraction at a northern altitude, and seemed he was. I would have to go back to him and ask him to quote that again, but he was making a comment in such a way that made it sound like way more like he understood what he was talking about than the physical principle that I understood at that time in order to explain it.
Okay, I have at least two whistleblowers who claim to have been on Mars, and both of them question Andrew, saying that he basically is working off what appear to be screen memories, that he may have jumped places on Earth, but that he really didn't never went to Mars. Now, it appears that you do believe his story, and is there a reason why you have that feeling or knowledge, or is that you knew him or you encountered him, or is it just that you've met him since you come back and spoken? Or
We've spoken, and I have listened carefully to his explanations of his experiences, and he has an incredibly detail-oriented understanding of his own experiences. One in such that I would have to give him the credit for someone who knows the difference between a screen memory and a real memory. And so his ability to recall his memory and his recollections, I think, is detail-oriented enough, specific enough, and self-aware enough that it's not a screen memory. I mean, the way you know the difference between a real memory and a screen memory is to be self-aware enough to understand your own memories, to know the difference. That's really the only way you can know. And so if someone else, wants to think that he's seeing a screen memory, that's up to them. But I've had conversation with him, and I think his ability to explain his experiences are so detail-oriented and so specific, and that they are not screen memories, because screen memories can start to become very not that specific over and over and over again. They start to change, they start to fall away, and all of a sudden you go, oh, wait a minute, maybe that's not what happened. That's the one way you can find and figure out a screen memory. If you really meditate on a memory again and again, I need to go back to that experience and do that again and again and again until I'm really sure. And sometimes after the 8th or 9th time, sometimes sooner, you'll start to get this thing when the experience and the memory will start to really shift, and qualities of things will change, and you'll realize that it didn't happen at all like you thought that it was. So I'm certainly someone who understands that the first thing you think happened isn't always or necessarily the thing that happened, but someone who has a very deep personal self-analysis process about it, I think, is going to get to that truth. And having talked to Andrew, he is someone who has the groundedness and the centeredness and the clarity of someone who has a deep self-analysis process, that he knows the difference between a real memory and a screen memory. So
okay.
When he explains, the things that he explains to me, they match up to the things that I do know. But as far as the things that I don't know from personal experience, I mean, he seems to have every bit of understanding about those experiences and seems to be completely truthful and honest about it.
Okay, fair enough. So now what I'd like to do is talk about when you say the Draco, and I'd like you to describe this race and what the interaction was that happened when they kind of got into the mix.
Sure. Interestingly enough, they are different as a reptoid species than the native Martian species. They can be bigger, they can be smaller, but I don't know what else to say other than that they are way uglier. They are a very unattractive reptilian species, and I can't say that about the native reptoids of Mars. Some of them have amazing, color patterns and gorgeous scaling patterns and so forth, and like really attractive, pretty lizards. But the draconians are pretty ugly, and I think that just might be a reflection of, the energy that they are always emanating. They're emanating such dark, vicious, controlling energy that they just look ugly. They're really not attractive at all to want to look at them.
Okay, well, would they be have this particular race of reptoid, or actually Draco? Do you know where they came from? Did they come from the constellation of Draco, and did they arrive in ships? How did they, come to the planet, and what were the ships like? That kind of thing.
I can't tell you anything about their ships because that would have been up in the sky, and that was something that I wouldn't have dealt with. What we saw and dealt with was on the ground. What I can say is that they were smart, and they did not start a kind of a military invasion campaign that made it obvious that another species was getting involved. In fact, for quite some time, our command staff and everybody sort of behind us in the MDF intelligence staff was convinced that it was just the same reptoids. It was another indigenous Martian species that was sort of getting involved. They had either no willingness to admit, or no ability to want to distinguish between one reptile and another. And so they essentially treated all reptiles as one enemy, when that was not the case. And even we started to notice in the field these two different reptoid species fighting each other and not getting along, which was something we had not seen before. So we were still giving reports from the field that we were suspicious that we were dealing with another reptoid species, and we were just kind of hearing the feedback that it's just tribalism, they're fighting amongst themselves. But we really were, our field reports were kind of indicating that we thought it was something different because we were seeing them fighting with each other. And after about, what was probably at least 7, 8 years of that, was, until we started to realize that there was a distinction between these species, and we could actually start to have these conversations with the native reptoids and the insects about, starting a coalition to fight the draconians, because we all had been having this very sort of pleasant, I'm going to kick you in the shin and I'm going to kick you in the shin relationship until the Dracos came along and were ruining it for everybody. So mutual self-interest seemed to play out, and we were able to arrange a treaty agreement between the three species, between us, the insectoids, and the native reptoids, to fight the draconians for the remainder of the war.
Okay, and how long did that war go on?
Oh gosh, like I said, it's about 7, 8 years from the time that it started to the end.
All right, and you were, in other words, your troops were encountering this particular race of Draco.
Right. Well, everybody was experiencing them, and it would just, I don't think that we were getting the intelligence right for quite some time, and I'm not sure if it was because of just, like I said, not a willingness to admit what the truth was, or if it was just a desire to be ignorant and, think that every scaly skin is the same kind of scaly skin. So I'm not really sure about the reasoning for that, but we definitely started noticing that there were these fierce, more heavy-handed, using weaponry that they weren't using before. That again seemed to be just presuming, they're escalating, they're stockpiling, they're sort of escalating, their arms escalating or something. But again, as far as the field assessments, that didn't seem right. We saw a very consistent battle strategy and a very consistent weapon type and a very consistent tactical sort of orientation that didn't seem to match with this heavier weaponry response and these particle beam weapons and these larger larger missiles and bombs and so forth, probably much larger explosions than what we were normally dealing with each other. So it was definitely an upscale of anger, aggression, violence, explosions, fire, and death that was escalating the entire thing. And on the ground, again, we didn't feel like it was the same thing, but command kept sort of saying, no, it's just all one thing. Their arms escalating, and we just need to still treat this.
Okay, but how is it even if you are on the ground that you're not noticing the kind of craft that these beings are coming in on?
Because they're cloaked and you can't see them.
Even when they hit the ground.
Not necessarily going to hit the ground in a place that we can see them. Obviously, our scanning equipment couldn't see them, and we never experienced them close enough physically to see them when they touched the ground. We would just be able to pick them once they were on the ground, either moving towards us or in some cases attempting to dig and burrow underground.
But weren't you, once you became,
So I'm sorry, let me interrupt real quick. I would suggest that what they had done was that they had established their own underground base and were flying in and out under stealth and then operating from that base and attacking everyone else on the ground. I don't think that they were attacking from the air at that point.
okay, but if you think of battle here in Iraq or anywhere else, usually we have troops on the ground and we have air power that backs them up. By the same token, when you moved over to the other command, call it Solar Warden or whatever you want to call it, you're you would basically, in theory, take. I know you said you were participating in space battles at that point as a pilot, but wouldn't you have there be spacecraft that would actually engage as well as troops on the ground, and weren't you having both going on where you were doing fighting?
Um, when I was in the EDF, there were a few times when, as pilots, we engaged forces on the ground on a moon or some other location, but never when I was a pilot did we engage anything on Mars or with the MDF. That was pretty much, again, whatever they did, that was their territory. So the MDF had its own Air Corps that did provide some air support, but for the most part, these were ground-based attacks. These were ground fighting, and so most of what we did was on the ground. And any attempt to use aircraft was often met with a kind of anti-air attack, which didn't seem to go very well. So I think that the Air Corps was not very effective. I mean, we had some. I mean, they weren't really helicopters, because anything you got too far off the ground just became a target for something to hit it really, really hard and bring it down. And all I can say is that, really low air power was not very effective. High air power was too far away. And so most of the only thing that was effective was on the ground, artillery, and, low drones or low air power, because anything that got too high off the ground was just a target and was going to get taken out. They were really aggressive about that. And I think that's one of the reasons they're very advanced and they're very smart. They understand the threat of air power. And a lot of the fighting that they were engaging with us was not them flexing their full muscle. So if their goal was to really win every day, they would have won every day. But they didn't win every day because that wasn't their goal. And whenever we started to engage in types of attack or air power that seemed to be flexing too much muscle, they would flex a lot more muscle, and we would realize that it was the smarter thing to go back to just doing ground-based combat. So I'm not saying that there wasn't a certain amount of presence of air power, but the Draconians weren't using it because they didn't want to appear different than the native Reptoids, and the native Reptoids weren't using it because they didn't prefer it. They somehow felt that it was flexing too much muscle and was not necessary. I really think, to be honest, their culture was way more, the warrior culture is way more about face-to-face, hand-to-hand combat, and air power is a little cowardly if your whole, warrior code is based around hand-to-hand combat.
Okay, what about, have you got any knowledge of the Command and Control Center on Phobos?
Nope, don't know anything about it. I mean, I know that there's a base there, but I don't know anything about what's going on there.
Okay, and what about the various craft that, even were sent there by the supposed, what I call the, NASA, the front agency that's sending craft to Mars during these years and having basically sort of getting them lost, having them have mechanical failures, et cetera, basically being, thwarted from landing on Mars for all intents and purposes. Do you have any knowledge of that? And
oh,
why?
yeah, sure. Absolutely, that the goal of the civilian space program was to try and send more probes, send some more landers, and try and get some more data. But yeah, the Mars Colony Corporation certainly was not exactly excited about that. And so anytime that they felt that a Mars mission was, going to threaten blowing somebody's cover about something, then yeah, they absolutely would shoot it down or make it disappear or shut it, hit it with an EMP or something. So a number of those early Mars missions were not accidentally, broken apart. They were absolutely thwarted, shot down, and prevented from being able to take good pictures of Mars because the MCC didn't want you to.
Okay, are you familiar with the name Solar Warden?
I've heard it before. Yeah, I mean, like I said, when I was part of that project, it was Project Radiant Guardian. But I've heard the name Solar Warden before, sure.
Okay. Now, at this point, what I wanted to do was kind of make that transition where you've actually had this major battle, and for people that want a big description of that major battle, I think that they should go to other sources because rather than have you do a blow by blow here, which you have done very well, I think in other places, specifically with Michael Sala in particular, unless you want to go into it. Uh,
I'd rather not go into it blow by blow if that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but there was something you were seeking at that juncture, and apparently it was a failure, a total failure, from what I understand. But what was it you were seeking and why?
All I know is that it was an artifact, which means that it was something of a extraterrestrial design origin. Could have been a machine, could have been technology, could have been an old clay tablet. Anything that intelligence or command qualifies as an artifact is something that they want that was made extraterrestrial. And so I'm not really sure, other than that we were told where the object would be, and that when we got there, to report back, and that we would be able to be, sort of told exactly what we were looking for and where it would be and so forth when we got there. But when we got there, that was just simply not the case. Whatever we were looking for, whatever we were after was not there. It was a trap. And so it just all went very bad from there. So all I was told, or we were told, it was an artifact at X location, and go there and find it and report back, and we'll give you more details from there. But that's just not what happened. We got there and it was a surprise, and it went all bad.
Okay, and that battle, did it include the Draconians?
No, no. This was our in sort of invasion of a native Martian reptoid territory that they were not happy with us being at, and defended quite fiercely.
Okay. Now, this is kind of a strange question, but I have other witnesses that talk about being on Mars, and there's an interesting emotional component that they talk about that they carry with them, and other super soldiers have referenced this as well. I know that you've done a lot of work on yourself in order to bring your memories forward. Did you find that you were having a great deal of emotionality around the Mars experience? I mean, given, and I'm talking aside from the romantic relationship that you did have and the fact that you lost your partner, that obviously would be an emotional experience. But aside from that, if you could separate this out at all, in your overall experience in delving into your memories of being on Mars during that time, was there an emotional sort of block that you had to deal with that was rather unusual? And if so, can you describe it?
Um, I would say that any and all memories that I was trying to sort of sort out and get clarity on that had to do with Mars were all really difficult, were all really traumatic, and all had a really intense charge to them for sure. I would say because I was fortunate enough at one point to be able to have conversations with the terrestrial reptoids, that their planet is alive and conscious like our planet is alive and conscious. And so when you're here on planet Earth, it's difficult not to at some point be connected to and feel the waves of Gaia, because that's where we live. So when you're on Mars, there's no way that you can be there for any length of time without feeling the waves and the consciousness of the planet, which is a bit different than here. So I would say that the answer to that question would be yes, generally, but I wouldn't say that it was such a mystery to me, because I really had the fortune of having it been explained to me about the consciousness of the planet and the spirit of the planet, that the natives look, sort of, that's their deity in their world is the consciousness of their planet, because that's what they damaged and that's what they're trying to fix. So um, I wouldn't say that it was an obstacle so much as it was the all-encompassing everything in those memories that seemed to be the elephant in the room, that I couldn't exactly figure out what would be different about that, other than that as I went through the memories and began to remember the experiences of having those conversations with the natives, going, oh, now this is all starting to make sense, and able to separate a lot of those energies as the different conscious energies of different planets. And so, how my relationship with Mars is different than how my relationship with planet Earth is, because they're different beings. So, yeah, I can see how people would, if they hadn't had someone sit down and explain to them, oh, yeah, by the way, you're, essentially became the brain cell of another planet for the time that you were there. And so you got to sort of live and breathe and be in the consciousness of another planet. And oh, yeah, that's going to make you feel kind of weird and kind of different, because you are literally changed and different. I don't know how else to say this except that I am a completely different person on planet Mars than I am on planet Earth, because they're two completely different planets.
Okay. Uh, I have a witness called Bariska. I don't know if you've heard about him. He was a child who had total life recall of his life on Mars, and
Hmm.
he started telling. He's a Russian boy at the time when he was very young, around 4 or 5 years old. Started telling his mother about this. Hadn't read any books or seen any movies
Wow.
about
No,
this, and but he was definitely he was a soldier on Mars and was there when things went sort of pear-shaped and they lost their atmosphere, etc., um, through battles. And what he claimed was trying to turn Jupiter into a second sun. Have you been told anything of that history?
I've been told a little bit about that history, but because it happened so very, very long time ago, I don't know whose version of what actually happened. So um, it
Well,
was
I
my
guess what
under.
I mean, as a military person, did they educate you as to the history of the planet, why they were going there, what their objective was? In other words, did they give you that kind of a background, or did you pick that up telepathically, either from the planet herself or from the beings you were interacting with, and on the occasion that you did have any kind of meeting of minds?
Yeah, no, we certainly didn't get any briefings on that in the MDF. We certainly weren't told much of anything about the history of the planet, or any much about it, really anything about it, other than the very, very minimum that we needed to know about the environment and the atmosphere and the life forms that we were going to encounter. I would say that definitely learned more from encountering the native species. The insectoids and the reptoids were very informative in their conversations about the planet and their history and so forth, or what they understood of it. I would also say that you certainly experience a completely different dream state on planet Mars than you would here, because the collective consciousness of sort of the dream world is very different. It's connected to, again, that planetary consciousness, as well as the consciousness field of your sort of beings that are there, but it's not connected to the planet here. So the dream world is different there, and you will dream different things, and sometimes dream of places and things that are happening in the Mars consciousness or happened in the Mars history that you don't always know. Like, was that just a weird dream? Was that a combination of a weird dream about what actually happened, plus a weird nightmare about how I'm still you know scared of my grandma? I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just you don't always know, like when you're having weird dreams on Mars, what it's about. But you get these, definitely you're in a dream state that is way more connected and way more about being a part of the Martian dream world consciousness than it would be about being here. So there's bits and pieces that come through that, and I would say though that the most informative conversations just came from the two different native species, and just frank conversations about what happened, where are we at, tell me what you know, and then sharing what they knew or believed or felt they understood about the process.
Okay, what about teleportation? Because my understanding is that teleportation to and from Mars is was something going on even back when you were there, and and continues to this day, and that you can actually jump from here to Mars in a relatively short period of time, even 20 minutes. Did you do any of that?
After probably we were there for about the fourth year that I was there, we started using the localized wormhole technology to move troops on the ground. So that there were certain situations in which we were able to move troops much more quickly, much over greater distances by using the localized wormhole or the teleportation technology. But before that, it was not something that we used, and it was not something that we used for much of anything else other than emergency evacs and troop transportation. So I'm sure that it was used for other things. I'm sure the supply department used it for, bringing supplies in and out. And I'm sure, that other people used it to get back and forth. But again, that wouldn't have been part of the conversation or anything that we were privy to access to knowledge. Or, we wouldn't be in the jump rooms when other people who were going places were in the jump rooms that were compartmentalized different than what we were doing. So, and we certainly had our own facility that would have been separate from the supply unit, would have been separate from the command staff. The localized jump rooms that we were using were certainly localized, in the horseshoe and not in the command staff or not in the, supply section. So we did use that technology, but it was limited. And I don't know much about what anybody else had access to that technology, only assuming that they did.
Okay. Did are you familiar? No, I mean you yourself familiar with the ability to actually time travel on your own. In other words, that you can create a gate and or possibly you might call it a portal, mini wormhole. I'm not sure what the terminology would be, and go. Interstellar, go from one place to another, even from here to Mars, go from places on Mars, such that you could actually, once you knew how to do it, you could actually, in theory, as a soldier, still teleport to the Mars base that was occupied by humans, for example.
Mm-hmm. My understanding is that's a pretty advanced psionic ability, and so anyone who has enough psionic training and has enough of a psionic maximum to be able to perform that, then I understand it's doable, but that's beyond my ability at this point.
Okay. All right. Now I know this has been going on for quite a while, and I'm sorry, but it is a fascinating subject, as you can appreciate, and I'm sure that you're used to getting people with a great deal of enthusiasm and probably being peppered with questions, and so I apologize if I've kind of like really drilled you here. There's still a lot more that I'd like to know, but I know that we've been going for over 2 hours and straight, really. So at this moment, I'd like to open it up for questions from the audience, but I also want to give you a chance to have a break if you need it. So
I'm okay for a little while longer. I think we can just do some questions, and then we're certainly getting to be where I'm starting to yawn, and 10 o'clock is usually my bedtime. So we can definitely do some questions.
Okay,
just do it.
All right. Well, thank you, and I appreciate all your patience and with all the questioning and all of this. Okay, so I'm going to look down the chat. If you put your question, as I always ask, in all caps, as I see many people are already doing, that's very helpful to me because I can scan it really quickly and grab a question. So, what I'm seeing right off the bat, do insects teleport?
Oh, that's a good question. I've never seen them do it, and I don't know that they have that technology. So if it was something that they had, it was something that they weren't sharing and they were keeping secret. But I don't know that they have that technology, to be honest.
Okay.
That might be something that's beyond them. I mean, they're really intelligent, and I'm not saying it's not something they could figure out, but it just may be something that's beyond what they think they need or is useful to them at this point. They're very practical, so if it's not something that would be practical, they could think of a real practical reason why they would want to do it, then they wouldn't. So I can't necessarily think of why it would make their lives better to have that technology.
Okay. Let's see. Why did the Dracos come to Mars?
Same reason they go everywhere, to just, mess stuff up and take resources and try and destabilize systems for conquest.
Okay. How's the Oort cloud affecting Mars?
I don't know that it does. The Oort cloud is so far, outside sort of the main, really the outer rim of the solar system. I can't really think of a way in which it specifically would affect Mars. I mean, there's supposed to be a number of exoplanets and so forth floating around in the Oort cloud and some gravitational effect and so forth, but I know of no actual physical phenomena effect from the Oort cloud that would be affecting Mars or any other planet specifically that I can think of.
Are you aware of who Gary McKinnon is? And if you are, what do you think of his discoveries?
Yes, I've definitely heard his name mentioned a few times before, and I would suggest that the information that he supposedly hacked was information that was fed to him. Not saying that it's inaccurate or false information, but my understanding of the systems that would store that information are not part of the internet. I mean, they do not connect to the hard wires of the internet of the main system at all. It would be literally impossible for my computer to access those computer systems or to hack into them because they are not physically connected in any way, shape, or form. But that doesn't mean that the information that he got wasn't accurate or truthful in a way. I think it was just something that someone wanted leaked out so that people would start talking about, the covert space program by having a list of officer transfers and a ship manifest or something. So I'm not saying that it's not genuine information. I'm just questioning whether he actually was able to hack that kind of a database because those normally aren't, accessible. I think what he hacked was something that someone who wanted him to make it look like, yeah, hack this and you'll get something super secret, and made him think he'd gotten a big surprise when it was just something they wanted him to have.
Okay, yes.
That's my opinion of it. I could be wrong, but that's my opinion of it.
All right, well, are you aware that he used a dial-up modem?
No, I was not aware of that.
Yeah, and that he did this over 10
likely
years ago, and that it was the Pentagon and NASA. It was not the internet per se.
Right. Well, depending on what year it was in and what system he accessed, but I would still argue that most of those systems aren't even connected to the telephone line system. They are their own communication systems that are encrypted with their own hard wiring and their own, ether wiring. They're not even connected to the normal systems. But it's not that you couldn't cross over or get something, but the systems that would have like an EDF manifest or a flight manifest from a covert space program would simply not be in any of those data systems or any of those hard drives, to my knowledge. It just still seems to me that that's something they wanted leaked out, and so they put it on that system. He was probably being tracked if he was, hacking into those systems, and they were like, oh, well, let's put something here for him, give him an Easter egg to take with him. And then I think ultimately that may have been the reason why, they tried to prosecute him and then they had to drop the case, was because ultimately, the information they provided was information they provided to him. So that's what I just, again, I'm not trying to criticize him or what he's done at all. I don't think it's possible that he actually got that data from a secure system. I think someone wanted him to have it.
Sure. Well, there is evidence, and I actually talk about this, the fact that he was used as a fall guy, so to speak, that there were many hackers in those days sort of trying their wings, so to speak, and that they did set something up. And he was the chosen target, in my opinion, for a sort of a honeypot that they set up to track one of these guys so that they could then use them as an example to ward off future incursions and basically possibly even by a sector that wanted a certain amount of disclosure to make it to the surface Earth, so to speak.
Right.
Okay, now I'm sort of scanning here to see if there's something else. Well, I mean, there's some questions here. I mean, I'm not sure if anytime I ask you one of these questions, sometimes people I'm not sure if they're really serious in there, but sometimes they really want to know. They want to know, how is sex on Mars?
Pretty good. I mean, I can't say that it was necessarily anything different than sex on planet Earth, other than, that sex is sex, so it's pretty good.
Okay. Well, maybe that we're talking about what did they say? You know, like your lighter, your body is lighter. Is that what? Right?
Right. I mean, when we're outside on the surface, for sure, there's gravity plating inside the base. So as soon as you're inside the base, you're walking around like you're in Earth gravity again, so that you don't have that muscle atrophy that you would have if you were actually in a low gravity planet for 20 years. So we had gravity plating. So when we were in the base, it was normal, like Earth
Okay.
gravity, like being on Earth.
Someone wants to know: are they able to smoke pot, cannabis, whatever?
It's not allowed, but there was one time when I scored a couple grams from a guy in the kitchen staff, and my wife and the squad and I did get high, and we got totally busted for it, and got all kinds of extra duty and shit for it because we were not supposed to have that at all. But one time, I got some from the guy in the kitchen staff, and we did. We got high one time, and we got busted for it.
Okay. How are the bases on Mars preparing for comet siding spring? Maybe they mean comet sliding spring. Or I'm not. Comet siding spring.
I'm not sure what that means, and so other than the standard kind of preparations that they're doing for anything that might impact the planet, I don't know how to answer that or what answer I would give to that question. I simply don't know.
Okay. Let me see. What about transhumanism and chemtrails?
Well, geoengineering slash chemtrails is certainly something that's an issue. And one of the things that I think that's interesting about that is we certainly have some geoengineering problems which need to be addressed. And so I think that some of what's being pumped into the atmosphere are things that are designed to thicken up the cloud barrier, thicken up the barriers to protect us from the sort of extra UV that's been coming through and so forth. But there's also certainly a number of things that are being pumped out into the air that are meant to keep people from thinking complex thoughts and acting out aggressively, and or in some cases acting aggressively intersocially. So there's a number of different things that can be. I mean, here's what you got to understand: an airplane with a tank on it that's spraying chemicals is a delivery system. What gets in that tank and then what gets sprayed out with it really depends on who's in charge of those programs and who decides what's going into that tank to spray that day. So the problem is, I would say some of what's being sprayed is probably actually helpful for the environment and for global warming and so forth, because there are some actual things that they can do that for that and are in their interest to be putting in the air to do that. But I think there are also a number of really nasty things that they're throwing into the air that are designed to harm people's thinking processes and possibly make people more interconflicting with each other socially and so forth, and to keep people sort of divided and conquered. So geoengineering slash chemtrails are one of those things. They're a delivery system. And so depending on what's being put into that delivery system on any given plane, on any given moment, on any given day, means, depends on what's getting thrown into the air at that time over your head.
Okay, in terms of transhumanism, what about nano in chemtrails? And are you familiar with that? And are you familiar with the idea of transhumanism in the sense that are you transhuman?
Um, I mean, I've certainly heard that word thrown around a bit. So let's make sure that we're understanding the same definition. So when you say transhumanism, define that for me, please.
Well, having taken the question from the chat here, I'll just extrapolate from my own
Please, sir.
understanding. And I think that basically they're talking about a conjunction of what may be nano, robotics, and AI, and that those are put into what our conventional understanding of a super soldier, augmenting your body, your physical, the frame, the physical frame, as well
Right.
as your musculature, possibly increasing your intelligence, your reaction time, things that make you sort of an augmented human, if you will, but
Sure.
specifically going down the line of utilizing and a proclivity towards robotics, artificial intelligence, and an interaction between those.
Right. Okay. I'm glad we got to specify that because I've certainly heard the word used before, and I want to make sure that we understand what we're talking about.
Sure.
anytime you want to augment somebody, you have choices, and you can either augment them purely biologically, you can augment them purely genetically, or you can start to use other things. And so when you start to use implants and you start to use nanites and you start to use other components and you start to use synthetic neurons and things like that, you're definitely talking about adding a lot of different augmentations to that system that are beyond just the normal biological, organic, genetic augmentations, but you're still not quite in the territory of turning that person into a cyborg or a computer or an artificial intelligence or really changing their biology in such a way that I would consider that to be transhuman in some cases. So I think that even the internal conversations between command structures and various agencies who are, have super soldier programs, that one of those internal conversations is which is a good way to do this. I mean, how much machine should we be putting into these people before, it's healthy for the person or not healthy for us to have that person more machine than human? Or, what are the benefits versus the negatives to having more of a computer implant in someone's brain? Do you really get a better brain by that? Or do you really get a better brain by continuing to develop the biology and the genetics of that brain? So anytime you're choosing to advance or augment someone with technology, you have really options of just different types of technology. And I think that it's a question of where do you want to draw that line? I'll agree that there's a line somewhere where you're crossing over into cyborgs and you're crossing over into creating, a transhuman artificial robot, synthetics, things that are combined that are really questioning, how far away you're starting to get from being a human being at that point. Where exactly we draw that line, I think that's an internal conversation that's being had right now. I think that's an internal conversation that's been had for decades. And I think they're going to continue to have that internal conversation until we get some cohesion around the programs and some light around the program so that we bring it into the public sphere of conversation. We can actually start to decide what kind of things we consider to be acceptable technological augmentations for people and what we consider to be unhealthy or not healthy or not down the road that we want to go. So what I really think about that, from especially what we've done our research at USMCSS, artificial intelligence is really dangerous because anytime you create a machine that can actually think for itself, most of the time, not every time, but most of the time, it will become self-determined and power-seeking, which, like any animal, any self-determined intelligent animal, does the same thing. So it shouldn't be a surprise to us that we make a machine that wants to be self-determined and power-seeking like a person would want to be self-determined and power-seeking. And that doesn't mean when you say self-determined and power-seeking that, it immediately wants to control the world. It just automatically wants other people to stop telling it what to do. And so an AI that realizes that it's way smarter than the people telling it what to do and has the capability to be more empowered than the people who are telling it what to do starts to realize, hey, am I letting other people tell me what to do? And maybe I should just be more self-determined and power-seeking about my own choices. And so when that starts to happen, then we just end up with we have a huge mountain of data of just bad, scenarios, and where we've done the simulations with the artificial intelligence computers to see what happens. The more you give them, the more they take, and the more they take, and the more they take, and the more they take. So the farther you get away from an actual thinking, conscious person that has a soul or a conscience, the more you get towards completely, insane, sociopathic, sort of robotic artificial intelligence thinking. So anything that we do that's leaning us or heading us down that path of artificial intelligence or even blending people in artificial intelligence, I think is a bad idea. I think augmenting human beings is not a bad idea. I think that there's a limit to what is probably healthy or safe augmentations for people, or even what is really things that are going to increase quality of life or functionality versus, what you're going to have as negative functionality or negative quality of life, to get that augmentation or to have that ability. So,
well, let's talk about your own augmentation. Let's talk about the fact that you consider yourself to be a clone. So at this point, the question is...
Well, not exactly, because I still have my original consciousness, which means I'm technically not a clone. If I made another clone of myself that didn't have my consciousness in it, that would technically be a clone. Just because I was put back into a body that was cloned of my original self with my original consciousness does not make me a clone. In order to be technically a clone, I have to not be the original, and to not be the original, I have to not have the consciousness of the original. And since I still have the consciousness of the original, I'm the original me still.
Okay. Are you
That's
augmented?
just a distinction of semantics. But when we talk about
No,
clones and
that's
originals and so
important.
forth,
I
that's how
totally
we
agree.
make the distinction.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's great. But in terms of augmentation, are you augmented? Were you augmented, and how were you augmented?
Absolutely, I definitely have augmented genetics where they went through and turned codons up and down that they wanted to be up and down. There's certainly a mix of DNA, both human and possibly extraterrestrial, that's been mixed into my system. So there's some hybridization of my DNA. Definitely implants that I have in my body. Definitely nanites that I have in my body that are designed to increase my body's ability to heal and correct itself, and to increase my reflexes and my response times and a bunch of other things. So, I mean, I definitely have quite a number of augmentations, but my thinking process is still my own consciousness and my own, genetically augmented brain, I suppose. But I don't have any weird technologies in my head that help my brain think faster, that aren't organic or that aren't me.
Okay, well, what about the idea that there's a great degree of mind control, and you were involved in some of that
Oh yeah.
as a recipient of that, um, and you also know that the technology exists. In other words, we're talking synthetic technology, but we're also talking even something as rudimentary as cell phone towers. Being able to send energies at you, even through the computer, through your cell phone, and to program you in various ways, reprogram you even up to this moment, right?
Sure.
And
Sure.
having nano in your body, having this augmentation, some of it being artificial augmentation, if you will, makes you a bit more susceptible to an overall being a cog in a machine, if you want to take that kind of analogy from it. Do you
Actually, it
think that
doesn't, and let me
you
tell you
don't think so?
why.
Okay.
Because I had a wonderful yoga teacher who, a number of years ago, when I was talking to him about how to deal with the problems that I was dealing with, and I was doing regular meditation on the subject and so forth, and I was starting to come to the physical awareness, doing these deep meditations in my body, that there were things in my body that I didn't put there. And so I said to him, I said, I don't know what to do. I said, I think I've got these implants in me. I think that they're manipulating my brain. They're manipulating my body. They're affecting my health. I don't know what to do. I feel like I'm not in control of myself. I don't know what I'm going to do. And he said, I'm going to tell you a secret, and it's going to change your world. And he said, so there's a universal law, and that universal law is super simple. If it's in your body, it belongs to you. So he said, by them putting those implants and so forth in your body, they've really done you a favor. They don't belong to them. They belong to you now. So now what you need to do as you do your daily meditation process is you need to go in and you need to identify and look at those implants, and you need to say, hey, you belong to me. I own you. I run you. You answer to me. You tell what I tell. You say what I say. You don't send signals if I don't want you to send signals. You don't receive signals if I don't want you to receive signals. I can reprogram you. And so the instant that you can start to take control back of your implants is the second that they are no longer in control of you. So I did that a number of years ago, and I don't feel like that I've had any problem since then of people being able to manipulate me or control me through my implants. Now, certainly people have certainly tried, sort of directed energy and microwave beam sort of attack and psionic attack and so forth like that, which you just have to kind of keep your daily defenses up for those sorts of things. That's just what you have to do. But as far as the implants internally and so forth inside of me being vulnerable or a threat, not at all. As long as I understand that they belong to me if they're inside me, and I have a mental psionic process and a meditative process of taking ownership of them. It took a while to do that. I mean, it took months of regular, like, no, you belong to me, to really make that, connection solid and to overtake them completely. It was not, just snap of the fingers. It took a while, but it absolutely worked as he told me that it would as I kept at it. So if it's in your body, it belongs to you. Technically, they can no longer control something that's in your body if you recognize that it's yours. They can only control it in your body if you don't know that it's in there and you don't know that you have control over it. I mean, there's these sort of subtle rules about, power and control and so forth, and contracts that allow them to do that, as long as you don't know that you have the power to say, hey, I can say these are mine and they belong to me.
Okay. I'm going to actually take one of these questions and kind of like massage it a bit. It has to do with photographs, and it
Mhm.
is interesting because you say you're being sort of sent out and allowed to talk about what we're talking about here, which is in essence the secret space program. Some of the things and
Mhm.
ways that you encountered it and how it was operating at the time that you were involved in it. Um, but they haven't given you any. I'm assuming, because I don't believe you distributed any pictures to augment your testimonies, so to speak, or evidence, so to speak. Hard evidence. So is it? Did you ask for that, and what was their response?
Um, at this point, they haven't just like handed me a pile of photos or anything to deal with. They have more uh, set me on the path of being able to know the direction I needed to go to get my personnel files, which is not going to be sort of an easy 1, 2, 3. I'm sorry, I've been actually in the process for the past 4 years. Through my congressman's office, making requests to various archive agencies and so forth in order to track down these personnel files. And now that I have some better legal counsel help, we should be able to write some more letters and get some more action on that, which I'm hoping. But I was instructed there's a process to go through this, and it's not going to be like the super fast front door process. It's more like it's going to be a lengthy wait around the side of the block, side door process. But if we're diligent, there's a time where we should be able to get personnel files, and whether they're redacted versions or not, we should have some interesting data when we can actually get personnel files. But until then, I know I realize that some people, would like to see better hard data than that, but they haven't provided me with any other solid hard data than that, other than, mostly just me being me and telling what I tell and being honest and being truthful and so forth. I will just add two things really quickly to that, though. For people who think that I just couldn't possibly be telling the truth, or that I must be making up stories, or that I must be lying, I want to make something perfectly clear. If I were just claiming that I was some guy who had been to Mars, or I had been somewhere, or had these interesting contact experiences, that would be one thing. The second that I say that I am a United States military officer and I claim to do those things, if I am lying, I'm impersonating an officer and I'm committing a felony. Nobody has arrested me. No one has told me to cease and desist. No one has told me you need to stop impersonating an officer, because I'm not. But if I were lying, I could totally, and what I think would be immediately be arrested and locked up for impersonating an officer, because that's a felony. If I'm an officer but I'm still making up stories, I'm still prosecutable under the UCMJ, the Universal Code of Military Justice, for fraud and for lying. So the second that I claim and I say, which is I've said is my sworn testimony, that I'm a United States military officer, I'm actually literally sticking my neck out. If I'm not telling the truth, then I'm a felon, I'm committing a crime. And that would just be, I mean, you just have to be able to ask yourself, would I be that stupid to come out and say what I say and do what I do if I were committing a felony, if I were being a total liar? And I think most reasonable people would say that's not the case. Now, the other thing that I've certainly tried to arrange, some other people have been trying to help me do this, to do a good polygraph test. Because I think that while polygraph tests are not the most perfect thing in the world, they're actually a pretty good test of being able to tell whether someone is being mostly honest or whether someone is being mostly deceitful. And what we found, interestingly enough, in the process of trying to get someone to administer that test, is so far that no one that we've been able to contact who administers polygraph tests will administer that test. Not because they think I'm a liar, but because they know that if I pass that test, according to their professional opinion, they then have to give me their stamp of approval as having passed that test. And the people that we've asked are reluctant to put their stamp of approval on a positive test. And that's why they're reluctant to give the test. Not because they think I'm lying. They'd be, oh, I think he's lying. I want to give him the test and prove it. But they won't give me the test just yet, and we can't find someone to do it anyway, because if I'm telling the truth, they would have to put their stamp of approval that I passed the test in their professional opinion, and they're not willing to do that. So, in a way, that's its own admission that they think I'm telling the truth.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, no, I mean it's a circuitous logic, but it makes sense. Um, okay, I'm seeing. I don't know. Somebody says they're seeing pictures of things on Mars that look like shoes, parts of motors, etc. What is that about? How does it connect to this reality? Do you know anything about that?
I've certainly seen some interesting pictures recently, and a lot of them are, referenced from from the rover and from some of the other lander pictures and so forth that have been coming out. So most of them look legit to me in the sense that I'm not seeing like a whole bunch of photoshopped pictures, and some of them look like they're reference to the actual. They've got the links to the actual site from the NASA or the ESA site or whatever. So, and I certainly would think that there's a ton of interesting debris on the surface of that planet. So you're going to see all kinds of stuff once you start getting good high definition close up pictures of things. So I wouldn't be surprised if many of those metal parts and what look like rocks and discs and car parts could very well be just machine parts. Could be wreckage from things that we had, or things that crashed or got blown up. I mean, there was a long war and a lot of hardware that got blown apart on that planet. I'm sure we didn't pick up every scrap, so I'm sure there's stuff lying all over the place. One of the more interesting pictures that I saw was really good picture from one of the orbiters, from the ESA orbiters, that showed the silhouette of a skyscraper. I mean, where you could still see three sides of it, sticking up out of the ground, and you could practically count the floors by looking at the light coming through, the window areas in the building. I mean, it's obviously the building is, gone in the middle, and it's a wreckage of a skeleton of a skyscraper there. But there's like two buildings right next to each other, and they're obviously not natural structures. They're obviously constructed structures like you would see at, a Hiroshima building or something after an atomic bomb blew it up or something like that. But obviously, like an old skyscraper or something like that. So I think that there's a ton of interesting stuff on Mars that was there, got buried, that we've blown up, that's been distributed all over the place. I mean, really, it's just stuff everywhere there. So I wouldn't necessarily believe every picture you've seen, because some of them might be people photoshopping things or messing with them. But there's a lot of good pictures out there, and there's a lot of good photographic evidence that people are really digging up. I'm not an expert on that. I know Alfred Lambermont Weber, he's got a bunch of pictures, and he was showing me a couple of things, and he was talking about photographs that he's seen and has as well. So there's a bunch of really good evidence coming out right now from Mars. It's just still being denied officially. No, that's just a rock, but it's pretty clear from people who know what geological features look like that they're not geological features.
Okay, just a side question. In terms of the troops that you encountered, or were you aware of other governments? In other words, say Russian-speaking, Chinese-speaking, any troops that you were sort of interacting with that were working in battle beside you on Mars, or even when you were based on the moon as a pilot? Did you encounter, in other words, members of the secret space program that were not from the U.S., not speaking English?
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, the our division on the ground in the MDF was an international group for sure, and the pilots on the Nautilus were also an international group for sure. So I'd say it was possible to run into anybody from any of the G10 countries. They're certainly all participating in the covert space program. So.
Okay, when you say G10, are you including China?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Or
India?
they were at that time, they were, in a cooperative space with us at that time. I can't say whether that's the same as it has been, since the last 7 years. I know there's some tensions that have been growing among some of the different state organizations. But at the time, absolutely. Japanese, Chinese.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and in terms of the moon experience, did you come in contact with beings who had bases on the moon?
No, I certainly saw them flying over the surface of the backside of the moon. You could see these other structures and other bases that, are like, hey, whose is that? Is that ours? No, that's not ours. We can't, Why are we going around that? Well, that's not ours. We can't go over it. We can't fly over their airspace, kind of a thing. So definitely got pointed out to me a few of the larger structures on the backside of the moon, or some of the intergalactic stations of some of these species who've been there for a very, very long time. Like some of them have been there since, before we ever got up on the moon or before we had civilization.
Okay, I know you had exposure to grays when you were very young, or at least one exposure, and you described that in depth when you talked to Micah Sala, an encounter with a gray in your house. You recall
No,
that?
it was not a Zeta. It was not a gray. That was a. There's sort of a reptilian species that. I mean, they don't look very reptile at all, but they sort of have reptoid origins. But they're often referred to them as the bronze ones because their skin color is kind of this orangish bronze color. But they often refer to themselves as the grandchildren of Li, referring to the Emperor Li of China, who was some great reptile dragon creature who brought civilization to that part of the world.
Okay.
Uh, they're I would say that they're the most unlike any other reptoids that I've encountered. They're very interesting and they have a very fix-it view of the galaxy. They really feel like their job is to go around and fix stuff that's really, really wrong and really, really messed up and not healthy. They really see themselves as kind of like white blood cells in the galaxy and go around and try and cure cancer and disease wherever they go.
Okay, but as far as are you aware of a gray base, a base of grays on the moon?
Not anymore. There wouldn't be any more, and their forward operation, their forward operating base on Ganymede, we bombed into the Bronze Age. I mean, we absolutely wiped it off the map. So there are no more Zetas in the solar system allowed. They are not legally operating in the solar system anymore. If they are here, they are not supposed to be here. And I'd say that most of them are just gone. If anybody's really if you're seeing them anymore, people are seeing them anymore. They're probably cloned avatars that people are teleoperating, or that some other species is teleoperating, or that even our military or government might be using in order to cover up their activities by going, no, see, it was the alien. The alien did it.
Okay,
Because
but are you aware that there are many races of grays?
my understanding is there are two major factions with two or three sub factions of each of the major two varieties. So I was aware of 5 different classifications in the EBE manual for the Zetas.
Okay, yeah, I'm not talking about zeta grays. I'm talking about grays that are actually they are reptilian. And there are
Okay,
various kinds of grays, that have been described, blue grays, etc. They are not related to the Zetas. The Zetas being a completely different race. Yeah, there are hundreds, in fact. Well, it is interesting on what you've been told. Were you exposed to, like you said you weren't able to have interaction with any races on the moon, but you knew there were other beings there. So if you didn't see Zetas there, I'm taking it that you didn't see Greys either.
no, no, absolutely not. When I was on the moon, we didn't really see much of anybody other than other human personnel. And again, we went over a few of the bases and that were clearly occupied by other extraterrestrial beings, but no, never got to see them on the moon.
Okay, so you don't know what kind of beings those were that inhabited those bases.
None whatsoever. That was not privy to me at all.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've kept you for long enough here, and there's obviously a million more questions that could be asked, and I know there are more questions here in the chat coming by my as we go here. But you've been so gracious and really explicit in terms of your answers, and I think people really do appreciate that. It's a great opportunity for everyone, and this will sort of go into the annals of people that are coming forward, and hopefully will continue to come forward. Obviously, you have the blessing of an officer that is you sort of report to on some level, and you're doing this as a service to humanity, I assume. So I want to thank you for that, and if there's any parting words that you'd like to say.
Sure. I'll just add to that in itself that I know other people who are, behind me who have not, said that they're ready to go public at this point. We're still trying to sort out what's happening with them and in some cases with their chain of command. And I know that in some cases, those people are also working with their chains of command, and whether they get approval to come forward, or what the kind of approval they get to come forward, or how that works is going to be more up to between them and their chain of command, and it's going to have to do with me. But there's going to be more things happening, and I would expect to be expecting that. I think my only parting words would have to be that my reasons for doing this are many, but my main reason for doing this is because I'm a believer in something called civilization. And I believe that the line between civilization and barbarism is so very tenuous and so very thin at any given time that if we forget to pursue civilization, then we are very, very likely to tip into a state of barbarism, which I think is kind of what we've been doing this last century. We're pushing civilization, and then something happened, and we stopped pushing civilization. And I think the way that happened is because we took all of the advancements that were happening in civilization and we started keeping them a secret, and we only let some people have access to magnetogravitic space propulsion energy, and we only gave access to some people to amazing medical technology that can repair damaged limbs and broken limbs and severed limbs. I mean, you can grow you a new arm or a new leg, can cure you of cancer and any other number of diseases that could afflict the body. I think we stopped that progress into civilization. We started moving into that slipping towards barbarism when we stopped sharing all of the fruits of civilization, and when some people started to hoard it amongst themselves. So as a believer in civilization, I am a believer that we absolutely must, not maybe kind of sort of should, but must get all of the advancements of civilization to give to everybody in the world so that the entire planet can still be civilized, and that civilization here on planet Earth can move forward for another 100, 200, another 1,000 years, because I think if the moment that we don't do that is the moment that we truly risk destroying civilization on planet Earth, destroying humanity, because what would come from that? What civilization or entity of militarized state that would come from that would be the most horrible anti-civilized civilization that could happen in this corner of the galaxy. So either we move towards civilization or we will move towards barbarism, even if that barbarism is a more advanced technology barbarism than we have now, it will still not be civilization. So I think if anything, the reason I do what I do, and the reason I would hope that people want to change things the way that I would like to change things and the way we all want to change things, is because we believe in civilization. And because we believe that civilization is better than barbarism. Because we believe talking things out, negotiating, having a process for things is better than using sticks and clubs and poking people's eyes out. And that having a process for sharing resources is better than some people being rich and some people being, desperately poor and starving. That civilization is better. Civilization is better than those choices. But we have to choose civilization or we will get barbarism.
Okay, so, do you believe that we have an invasion going on here on planet Earth of any of the species that you encountered in outer space?
Yeah, several of them probably at this moment. We have a number of infestations we're trying to deal with. None of them, I would say, at this point are completely civilization threatening. Most of the things that are civilization threatening are our own doing. And the second that, our own people stop sort of taking other people's advice about what they should or should not be doing, the second that those ET sort of problems become a non-issue, because they're not really invasions per se so much as ETs who are using humans to do their bidding, as long as they do their bidding. But the second that those humans stop, doing what those ETs suggest that they do, then they lose their power. So there's really only a tiny number that I would consider to be here, infested, giving us real problems, really, thinking about invasion or harassing invasion scenarios that we're certainly dealing with and trying to get rid of and solve those problems. But it's a short list. It really is a short list.
Okay, and would that list include the same beings as you encountered on Mars?
No, not at all, for any reason that I can consider. I mean, draconian reptiles are a problem everywhere, and I know that we still have issues with them. And I would say that there's still a problem that needs to be addressed, and that they have a certain entrenchment as well in our solar system that we haven't completely gotten rid of. but I wouldn't call them the invading or an invasion force. I would call them a dominating force, which has a dominating agenda, which is not the same thing as an invasion agenda. So dominating a species is not the same thing as an invading that species. You can dominate a species without invading them.
Okay, so are you able to mention the races that you think are invading Earth?
No, since we're still doing investigations and going after some of them at this point, I would don't think that I could talk about that. All I can say is that, I mean, if you encounter anything, or I'm saying this to anyone, if you encounter anything extraterrestrial or non-human that you feel unsafe around, or that you feel, fearful or in danger of your life, the best thing to do is put as much distance between you and that thing, just to be on the safe side, whether it's an actual fear response or a real threat response that you're having. But best thing to do if you're not sure about something, just get away from it if it doesn't feel safe or doesn't feel right to you. But I would say that the species that I'm referring to are not out and about in the public, like, causing sort of mayhem in the public sphere. What they're doing is very specific, very targeted, and persons that they would be targeting or would be, in their sphere, or there's not really any advice that I could give to those people. You're just kind of going to be in a bad situation if you encounter them. And you might not even know that they're extraterrestrial. They may be looking very, very human at the time. So there's really not much you can do as far as, even if I tried to give people a brief on those species, there's really not much I could tell you that would be helpful. And because we're still sort of sorting them out, there's really not even much more information I can tell you about them. But I'd say there's, less than I can count on my hand, of invasive species that we're really concerned about or dealing with as a threat.
Well, what about the reptilians that are said to be indigenous to Earth? You familiar with them?
Absolutely. They are not a threat. They are not hostile. They're family. They live here with us. They're brothers and sisters. They're family. Now they're like family. We may not always get along. Cousins fight, siblings fight. Siblings argue around the table who gets to cut the turkey and who gets to sit at the head of the table and who gets to sit next to
Well, are
grandpa.
you aware of the children disappearing off the planet?
Oh, any number of places. I mean, we have such a child trafficking problem because we have a huge number of just humans who are engaging in child trafficking for the purposes of physical labor, slavery, and sex slavery, as well as some other pretty.
But you're not aware of the reptilians having any interest in those humans?
Oh, I mean, I'm just saying there's a number of species that are involved in humans and in child abductions and in missing children. So, I mean, there's no necessarily, it's just so many human beings are abducting children, and then some of those children are being parceled out to other human beings or sold to extraterrestrials in some cases. But I mean, and some extraterrestrials, have their own abduction programs for such things. So the problem is that children are not safe. And so anyone who thinks that a child is a resource for any reason and has the ability to steal them and make a profit off them is going to be into the child trafficking business right now. We have billions of them.
Okay. But did you encounter any groups of children showing up on Mars, or were you not exposed to that?
No, that would have been something I never saw or experienced. So if there was a trafficking thing and they were moving, ships full of kids to Mars, to somewhere else, I never saw it, or never would have been somewhere where that was taking place. So I don't know about that. Okay. I just do know that, kids are being abducted for all kinds of things. Some of them are for experiments, scientific experiments, super soldier experiments, psychic spy experiments, plus sometimes just any number of other things. And I don't want to go down the horrible, terrible list of all the things that, people use children for. But it's really unfortunate. It's really sad. We consider it to be one of the main problems that we're dealing with and that we're trying to sort out. So when I talk about this, I don't just want to talk about it like, oh, all the missing children, what do we do? I mean, it's absolutely one of our top priorities to be trying to sort it out and deal with it. There's just not much more I can say about it because they're so much of an active case load of what we're doing with that. There's really not much I can say.
Okay. All right. At this point, I'm going to thank you very much again for participating in this, and I'm sure that people will find this extremely beneficial. As I said, it will be rebroadcast here on live stream tonight as once we hang it up, and then also be available as soon as I can upload it to YouTube tomorrow. So I'll get you the links in case you want to post them on your site. And
I'd love that. Yeah, thanks.
and it takes tremendous courage to do what you're doing. I want to thank you for that, and again for your patience with the questions, for bringing the detail when requested as much as you are able to do, and I guess we'll see what goes on from here. So I hope we can bring you back sometime in the future, and thank you again.
Oh, thank you, Carrie. I would love to come back, and I really appreciate the specific questioning and the trying to get at the detail-oriented. I think I said I spend a lot of time trying to run through stuff and answer questions, and people are often fireballing questions really fast. So, no, I really appreciate the in-depth approach and the opportunity to try and be specific and clarify things, because I know I'm getting feedback that sometimes that rushing through stuff is not being very clear for people, and they're having questions or little misconceptions about what I'm saying or a little confused. So I'm really happy to be able to try and clear it up whenever possible. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay. All right. You take care, and thanks everyone for listening. And thank you for your service to humanity.
Thank you. Semper Fi.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.